This story begins with a voice saying that heaven and earth are benevolent to everything and everyone. Therefore, they should observe them creating a perfect world of cultivation. Since the birth of the world, a beginning of chaos, a great man named Tao always existed and was responsible for the laws of heaven and earth. Below him, the world went through two great cycles, and during the first one, thousands of people trained and cultivated meticulously to reach the celestial realm. However, living beings were greedy, and not only did they selfishly steal the spiritual roots of heaven and earth, but they also attempted to seize the source of the celestial Tao. Because of this, he was weakened by the greed of the world and became very disappointed with living beings. And eventually, he ended up destroying all of them. Thus, the second cycle began. There were three worlds: heaven, human, and earth, and they were divided into areas no longer the same as before. The west was controlled by the gods, while the east was managed by the immortals. The earthly realm turned into a private place that became a lost land, and the piled-up bones grew taller than mountains. The human realm was located between the powerful heavenly realm and the earthly realm, where the weak fall during the cycle of reincarnation. However, after everything the second cycle went through, some from the first cycle had not been completely annihilated by that destruction. Some of them reincarnated as humans, and others simply came back to life. Others were reborn with their powers intact. They all shared the same purpose, which was to embark on the path of destiny and, as a result, challenge the celestial Tao. Thus, Tao awoke enraged and cast thunder upon the earth. And for the second time, the world ended up being destroyed. So now the world was in its third cycle, and decades had passed when, hearing that story, a random boy said he didn't want to know about it. In short, the previous celestial Tao left that world behind, and now he was the new celestial Tao. Next, the young man starts walking somewhere, saying he had just arrived in that world and it was already giving him too much importance, so it must have high expectations of him. The spirit says he is right because it is the celestial Tao that possesses unlimited power over that world. Then the scene shifts to an old man walking on a mountain. Apparently, he was surprised by something. Looking ahead, he notices a boy talking to a spirit, saying that strength doesn't solve all problems and that it only serves to defeat enemies. And Brother Sun had said that once one becomes strong and uses their strength against someone stronger, the weak use strength to fight the weak. However, he was not the old celestial Tao and would never make that same mistake. The old man, observing the young man, wonders if perhaps the boy was talking to himself as he couldn't see the spirit. Right after, he hears a strange noise. Looking back, he seems surprised because a giant dragon was coming towards them. With its frightening teeth, the dragon was about to seize its target. However, our boy remained still, watching the monster. It seemed as though he was recalling some rules to become the true celestial Tao. At that moment, the dragon lunges at the young man. He then removes some wax from his ear, shooting it towards the dragon. However, it ends up missing him, hitting the mountains behind the dragon instead. With a threatening look, the protagonist starts to stare at the monster, which then seemed to be trembling in fear. Thus, the monster begins to flee, and the boy says it couldn't withstand 3 of his attacks. Then the spirit asks why he did that. The boy replies that he only wanted to give it a little scare and wasn't trying to hit it. The spirit questions whether he wasn't going to use force against his opponents. The boy responds that as long as negotiation is possible, that world wouldn't be destroyed for the 3rd time. Besides, he had arrived there just an hour ago, so he still knew almost nothing about that world and wasn't familiar with the situation there. Right after it, he starts observing the place, saying that his first stop would be there. Shortly after, the scene shifts to the gates of the City of Freedom and several people seem to be walking between them. Meanwhile, a carriage appeared to be heading somewhere, and inside it, there were some slaves. The other man says that the hunt this time was great. For that reason, he would certainly get good payment for those women. Moreover, fairies are always sought after by the nobles of that city. At that moment, the protagonist suddenly appears in that place. The other guy, in turn, asks if he might be interested in his slaves. However, the young man remains silent. Continuing to speak, the guy offers his deal to the young man, because those fairies were the most recently captured, ranging from war prisoners to innocent women from a village. Observing the women, the protagonist stays silent. Then he seems to activate some ability with his eye. Looking at them, he assumes they all have empty hearts. Continuing his pitch, the man says that if those women were not pleasing him, he might have a very rare product for him. He calls the young man to follow him, and at that moment, he begins to pull off a cloth. The protagonist, watching, seems surprised. A beautiful girl then appears in that cell. The man says she is of the elven race, which can only be found on the western continent, and that he could have her for just 1,000 gold coins. Seeing this, the boy remains silent. Shortly after, he begins to leave. The man, irritated, assumes the protagonist is just a wanderer. As he walks away, the protagonist wonders if that was human trafficking, because it was really worse than in a feudal society. Then the spirit appears and questions why he doesn't free them. Perhaps it was part of his character. The boy asks why he should want to free them, because the slave traders would only keep capturing more people, and that wouldn't completely solve the problem. For this reason, he should look at what was in front of him, because there were at least 100 slaves in that shop, and it had branches across all continents. So, none of that could be resolved in such an easy way. The spirit says he is the celestial Tao. Therefore, as long as it was his wish, all the slaves in the world could be freed. The boy responds that another market would appear to fill the commercial void, and the wave of hunters could return once again. Unlike his predecessor, to solve the problem, he would need to deal with the main route. Entering the house, the other man welcomes the protagonist, asking what he might be looking for. Then he starts to present all the slaves, saying they had just been well-trained by his market and guaranteed they wouldn't try to escape. Therefore, if any of them tried to desert, he could pay 10 times the price they were worth. The protagonist asks if, by letting them escape, it would still be considered fleeing. The man responds that as long as he buys them, even if he tells them to leave, they wouldn't leave his side. The young man asks if he could ask her some questions. The boy replies that he could, because if he wasn't satisfied with that slave, he could go to the VIP room where others were for sale. Meanwhile, that other woman was carefully observing the young man. Our protagonist, in turn, asks if she desires freedom. In response, she only nods her head. Our boy asks if she loves anyone. In silence, the woman remains quiet. The protagonist questions whether she desires to be a free person or continue as a slave. Reluctantly, the woman says she only wishes to be her master's slave. Hearing what the woman said, the protagonist seems to give up, asking the man to take him to the VIP room. Sometime later, that man seemed to be serving tea to the boy, telling him to enjoy it. Therefore, he should wait a little longer because he would inform someone to bring his exclusive products. Then he leaves the room. At that moment, our boy asks the system to open. Thus, the rule protocol should be initiated, and the abolition of slavery would be the first thing as his mission as the celestial Tao. At that moment, a system appears and a voice asks him to describe the rule he wishes to add. So the protagonist begins to think, saying that any act committed against any human or humanoid creature for trafficking purposes would trigger the rule. Because if this happens, human traffickers would see the dark figure whose strength far surpassed theirs. And before engaging with the human trafficker, he would receive a warning. Shortly after, the spirit says the system has doubts as to why it ranked below the 5th position. The protagonist asks if he expected immortals to engage in human trafficking. Therefore, he shouldn't say he felt a bit ashamed of it. Shortly after, he begins writing more information, saying that until the first warning fails, a monster would attack until they stop trafficking beyond its intention. Right after, the system notifies that the rule is being prepared. It then requests a definition of human trafficking. The young man responds that it should cover all types of methods, except when it is voluntary slavery. If that happens, it should simply ignore it. Shortly after, the system notifies that the rule has been established, asking if it should be implemented. Thus, the young man clicks on the option for yes. At that moment, a light appears, and the scene cuts to that man bringing some slaves. In a matter of seconds, something strange seems to be happening. The system announces that the rule is now in operation. Right after, someone seems to open the door. That other man appears, saying these are the 10 best products he selected for the protagonist. All the slaves are then presented, and the man says he expects a high price for them. At that moment, something strange appears behind that man. A terrifying figure starts watching him. Seeing the monster, the man becomes desperate, and as a result, he falls to the ground in fear, asking if the protagonist can see it too. The protagonist replies that of course he can, asking if this is how his trading house welcomes its guests. The man replies that it isn't supposed to be like that. Our boy responds that in that case, he's already starting from this place. The other man then asks what the protagonist is doing because getting close to that creature is very dangerous. However, the young man responds that if he wasn't in that place, he was the only danger. At that moment, someone ends up flying out of the wall. However, the protagonist manages to catch him. He appears to be badly injured. Right after, that boy calls him captain. The protagonist, in turn, asks who that man is. The man responds that he is one of the security captains of his trading house and a powerful second-order warrior. Observing the monster, the man wonders what it is, stating that it is obviously like him, but its strength surpasses his by far. Shortly after, that creature steps into the room, and it is revealed that the creature has the same appearance as that other man. Surprised, the man asks the boy if he has encountered such a situation as well, saying it would be best for the protagonist to leave because he couldn't guarantee his safety. Dao, in turn, asks him not to worry because there are no people in this world who could kill him yet. Irritated, the other man says he will leave Dao on his own. At that moment, the monster starts preparing its attack. Then the two charge at each other, and an attack is exchanged. As a result of the attacks, those slaves seem to be hit by the projectiles. However, the protagonist appears to intervene in this situation. At that moment, the other man is struck by his monster. As a result, he is severely injured. The monster, in turn, is quickly right in front of him. The man begins to plead for mercy, ordering it not to come closer. However, he gets confused by something, because the monster simply starts to walk away. It begins heading towards the slaves, where it quickly raises its sword, starting to break all their chains, thus setting them all free. The man, in surprise, wonders what is happening. Dao, surprised, says that he finally understands now. Because those shadows don't want to kill them, they just want to free the slaves. Right after, the other man appears, asking for them to stop the monsters. telling them they shouldn't let the slaves escape. However, it is all in vain because all of his products are already leaving. At that moment, a monster resembling that man appears behind him. It quickly pushes him down. As a result, he falls hard to the ground. The other girl, in turn, is silently watching the situation, and as a consequence, she begins to flee. The man, in turn, is distraught as his money is slipping away. At that moment, a figure appears behind that man, and the woman seems to notice it. Then it is revealed that the protagonist is beneath her, asking the girl to return home. With tears in her eyes, the woman says she will do that, and as a result, she leaves. Watching the situation, Dao responds that all of this happened very quickly. At that moment, an unknown figure appears. Kneeling, the woman says she has finally found her master. Then the scene cuts to a tea house in that city, and Dao still seems to be drinking something, asking if he hadn't told her not to follow him. The girl says that this servant's name is Qin, and she has sworn to follow him, asking him to allow her to be his servant and travel with him across the continent. However, the protagonist ends up rejecting the girl's request. Devastated, she asks why, begging him not to abandon her like that. She questions if she did something wrong, and if so, she would change to satisfy him. Shortly after, the boy asks her to stand up, stating that he wasn't abandoning her. It was just that she was too attached. Therefore, she had a bad personality and her stability was moderate. And the moment someone annoyed her, she could easily destroy an entire country, thus it became a big problem. Qin, in turn, says she only wishes to stay by Dao's side. The boy says he feels very embarrassed when he's with her, asking if she still wants to stay with him, claiming that the girl is only after his body. So if he allowed her to stay, sooner or later, she might sneak into his room in the middle of the night. Right after, the spirit appears, saying that the girl wouldn't dare to do that because she would probably just snuggle up to him. Dao says she can follow him. However, she stays by his side and remains quiet. She won't draw attention. Observing the situation, Qin thinks that her master doesn't want her kneeling, and for that reason, he cares a lot. Dao, in turn, says he only wishes to abolish slavery. However, now he has his slave in front of him, and as far as he remembers, there are 5 celestial incarnations of the former celestial Dao. He asks what the other incarnations like her are. The spirit says that of the 5 celestial incarnations, 3 are women, while the other 2 are men. Moreover, they are all absolutely loyal to him, and the protagonist, embarrassed, says they are a bunch of problems. Shortly after, the protagonist calls the girl. Qin quickly responds that his servant is there. Dao asks her what she thinks of those who oppose the celestial Dao. Qin responds that they are insolent and ambitious. During both the first and second great cycles, they were so ambitious that they even killed themselves. Stating that gods died and demons perished, all herbs were hastened, and for all eternity, only the heavens were eternal. Affirming that the protagonist is her master and the eternal ruler of the 3 worlds. The protagonist responds that this is not necessarily true, because despite the celestial Dao being invincible in the first battle, he would have no chance of holding out in a group battle. Standing up, the boy says that time is against them, and they still have much work to do. Shortly after, the scene shifts to another part of the city. The young man once again seems to summon the system screen, thinking that adding the rules was easy and that his plan had been successful. As they walk down the street, Qin says she has a question, claiming that he could easily provide unlimited wealth for everyone and eliminate all social pressure and hierarchy. She asks why he decided to use the Black Shadow to abolish slavery. Slapping the girl's head, the protagonist asks if she is stupid, asking if that wouldn't make everyone reject humanity and return to the era of apes. The reason for the celestial Dao is to maintain order, and what he is doing now is merely correcting the situation, and not interrupting the natural cycle of society. Therefore, his work should be called opening the path for people and being in command of everything, guiding them. In a world where light exists, darkness is also something extremely undesirable. Hearing what the girl said, Qin responds that she understands everything. Looking to the side, Dao seems to notice something, as a woman appears to be handing some coins to someone. The protagonist says that this is truly an example, asking to prevent the girl from ruining everything she should hide. Meanwhile, that girl seems to be helping a beggar, and another scoundrel is stealing her coin pouch. At that moment, the protagonist intervenes, telling her to pay attention because her wallet is about to be stolen. Quickly, the woman notices the man, and in an instant, she kicks him. The kick is so strong that the man is thrown away. Shortly after, the woman begins to observe Dao and thanks him for his help. As she greets the protagonist, the girl introduces herself, asking if he could offer her a job. The protagonist asks her to call him Dao. Thanking him again, she replies that if it weren't for him, she would be in a lot of trouble. Dao responds that it was just a trivial matter, so she should pay more attention to her belongings. As he begins to leave, the girl replies that she has more work to do and thus starts bidding farewell to the protagonist. Realizing that the girl is an adventurer, he asks if she might be willing to take on a job for him, thinking that if he wants to learn more about this world, it's better to find an adventurer to discuss it with. Furthermore, that loyal girl was good, but regardless of what was said to her, she might end up agreeing. At that moment, Dao hands her a pouch of coins, saying that he wanted to go west and that it was a bit boring, so he wished to find some people to talk to. The girl in turn becomes very happy, saying that the protagonist is very generous. Amid all this, she asks if she could chat a little with Dao. He then responds that she should stay hidden because he would let her out again if she stopped talking to him. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the girl saying that the carriage is ready, apologizing if it took a bit long to prepare. Moreover, it was a smaller carriage to avoid attracting attention from others. Thus, Yi begins to introduce Dao to her colleagues accompanying them on the journey. Observing them, the protagonist says it's a pleasure to meet them. And so, they set off. Meanwhile, that girl seemed to be discussing various matters with Dao. He then asks if Miss Mary is a nun from the Church of Light. The girl says that is exactly it, wishing the light to bless him. Dao in turn becomes pensive about the God of Light, thinking that the second great cycle of the God of Light was only at the peak of the celestial ranking and had no chance of fighting the celestial. Observing the protagonist, the girl appears a bit uneasy. Shortly after, Dao apologizes for that. He thinks that the God of Light from the first great cycle was killed by Qin. Then the spirit appears and says that Qin would probably claim she forgot everything. The number of celestial rankings from the first cycle was eliminated by her hand. The man begins to speak, mentioning that nowadays there aren't many people who pay just for conversation. He asks if the boy doesn't have guards. Dao replies that the guards wouldn't be as strong as him. Soon Yi appears and says that Dao is so strong that he doesn't need guards to lead the City of Freedom. The man comments that this is true because the protagonist's aura is so contained that it almost completely disappears. That's why he can hardly sense any presence. At that moment, the scene cuts to the underworld. A girl seems to be imprisoned. In that instant, she begins to feel her master's aura. The other man says that this is the nightmare of a slave trader, so he can't even imagine how many people have died at the hands of that figure. Shortly after, the scene returns to the protagonist, who thinks he is surprised to have been found because of his aura. For that reason, he had been too careless. The girl asks him to look ahead. A crowd of people is passing through that path. The other girl, observing the situation, wonders who those men are and if they seem to be refugees. The protagonist responds that they are probably slaves freed by the figure from the City of Freedom. The girl questions why they left that city, as it is very dangerous. The other woman replies that it could be because after the dark figure appeared, the slave traders had no more places to go. The other man says that this is the nightmare of a slave trader. Therefore, you couldn't even imagine how many people had died at the hands of that dark figure. The other girl says that despite the church's teachings prohibiting the slave trade, the actions of that dark figure were also very radical. However, the other woman, irritated, says that she has wanted to punch those traders for a long time. Then the protagonist asks if they think the actions of the dark figure are right or wrong. The two girls remain silent. However, the other man responds that she was right, so they should think better about it. Compared to prolonged misery, the sacrifices are only temporary. They may have lost only the gems, but they still gain the future. The other girl responds that they did what they had to do. But unfortunately, the dark figure didn't save the slaves who were still sold. So she wished for the goddess of light to save people from their suffering. Dao asks what the point of her prayer is. The girl, confused, asks what he means. The protagonist continues and says that the goddess of light cannot save those people. The girl, irritated, says that the goddess of light is benevolent. She believes that sooner or later she will save the world from all its misery. However, Dao replies that she cannot. He intervenes in the situation to calm them down. Dao thinks he wasn't joking because the goddess of light couldn't even save herself. Shortly after, the other man says that phrasing it like that is an exaggeration. Dao questions if he believes in God's salvation. The man replies that instead of believing in that kind of thing, he prefers to learn more spells to protect himself. He says it's true because it's better to save oneself than to ask for help. They cannot waste time thinking about relying on God to save them. The nun asks how some remote countries on the original continent are using live sacrifices to create rain. Dao asks if that's real. He questions if the young man would ask just to let a third-degree Taoist draw a flying ice talisman. Once the ice finds the clouds, it would likely rain. The young man is surprised by the protagonist's explanation. However, the other two seem not to believe it and start laughing at the boy. Qin in turn becomes irritated and tries to intervene in the situation, but the boy asks her to wait. Shortly after, Qin stops, realizing something is different. Dao, observing the situation, wonders why the girl is so quiet. At that moment, he understands why. He removes his hand and opens the system screen. He thinks he already knows what to do at that moment. Sometime later, the scene cuts to nighttime. The group seems to be camping at a certain location. That other young man appears to be performing some kind of magic. He lights the campfire and says it's very dangerous to travel at night. Therefore, he would have to ask them to stay there for the night. Observing the system screen, the protagonist says there are 3 third-degree magical beasts nearby. Shortly after, Qin appears at the scene. She mentions that there is a group of dead to the southwest that might pass by. She asks what she should do. Taking his blanket, Dao tells her to do nothing. She should just stand still and soon go to sleep. Hearing what the boy said, Qin remains silent. Wishing her master a good night, Dao throws a piece of wood to Qin. Confused, Qin asks what that was. On that piece of wood, it was written that attacks on everything were forbidden. She should do so at her own risk. Meanwhile, the man and the girl are talking outside. They mention that when they return from the mission, they should go to her parents' house and tell them she is pregnant. Dao, observing the situation, wonders if those people don't know how to be discreet. At that moment, the young man senses something and is surprised. He asks everyone to get up because something strange is outside. Looking down, he finds a strange light. At that moment, a skull appears. Behind it, an entire army of undead emerges. Observing this, Dao thinks the number of dead is excessive. The spirit says that everything is broken. Dao asks if the spirit means that reincarnation is interrupted. He demands an explanation. The spirit says that at the beginning of the first cycle, the former celestial Dao used his own power to evolve reincarnation. Thus, he balanced yin and yang. At the end of the first great cycle, reincarnation was destroyed by a reverse king-rank power. Dao asks if they were that powerful. He wants to know why they didn't pierce the heavens. The spirit responds that they did, and a flow of chaotic energy poured onto the main continent, causing many casualties. The protagonist says that now he understands a bit about the former celestial Dao. Certainly, strength does not solve all problems because it would only end his enemies. At that moment, another monster appears. It says that it has finally found a human. Guy, surprised, says that they could even talk. Then the nun appears and apologizes to the boy. She says that they might all be killed. There were several monsters along with the undead soldiers. The other young man says that unless the protagonist is truly stronger than him, they might die. Right after, the nun throws her staff to the ground. She begins to pray for her goddess to save them. Dao in turn expresses that he dislikes it when someone kneels near him. He comments that the monsters possess some intelligence. He asks if they really wish to fight him. The monster, observing the situation, senses the protagonist's aura. Thus, his army begins to advance towards him. Qin appears and states that they should eliminate all the monsters. However, something different happens. The other monster defeats his own soldiers. It declares that the powerful man should not be attacked. Dao was surprised to realize that a dragon-like individual can recognize hierarchy. After discovering a threat capable of eliminating its entire group, it didn't hesitate to kill the undead beneath it. The monster responds that he is correct. However, it is a fact that the weak should be killed immediately. He orders his soldiers to advance toward the other group. Dao observes the situation and comments that he hired those soldiers to talk to him. Therefore, as long as they haven't completed their mission, the monster has no permission to lay a finger on them. Shortly after, Dao stomps hard on the ground. He is able to tear the mountains, opening a crater between them. As a result, several monsters fall into an abyss. All the monsters are defeated easily. The general is impressed because that strength is unbelievable. The group watches and thinks that the protagonist is indeed extremely powerful. Then, the spirit asks if he hadn't said he wouldn't use force to deal with others. The protagonist replies that while strength can solve problems, it must also be used to handle enemies. Noticing the gathering of skeletons, the boy asks them to stop hiding. He asks who the leader is. Shortly after, a girl stands up and says her name is Ymir, a member of the Church of Necromancers. She apologizes for the disturbance. Dao is impressed because the girl is genuinely polite. He comments that he is not an unreasonable person and that this is a no man's land. Therefore, everyone should come and go as they please. He suggests that she leave and be more cautious in the future, as not everyone is as moderate as he is. The girl thanks the protagonist for his offer and commands the monsters to clear the path. A while later, the group seems to be walking. The man says he never imagined an undead knight kneeling before him. He wonders how powerful Dao truly is. Meanwhile, the nun remains silent. Apparently, she does not like what she's seeing. She comments that the boy cannot leave things like this because those are undead. If they let this happen, more people could be killed by them. Dao asks what she thinks he should do. The nun mentions that the hero is stronger than everyone and therefore should eliminate them all. Besides, he is the savior hero who has helped everyone. Thus, he should do what's right. Shortly after, the protagonist slaps her hand. He asks if she means that just because he's the strongest, he should eliminate them. Therefore, he wants to know if she is truly a devotee of the goddess of light. In the eyes of the goddess of light, the undead are merely creatures that hate sunlight. So even if they have followed different paths, they are definitely not evil. All things in that world should be seen as similar, depending on their beliefs or races. He asks if she doesn't feel guilty for destroying others who think and believe differently from her. Shortly after, the other girl intervenes. She asks if the protagonist knows the primordial goddess of light. Dao questions if she is trying to make a joke, as there is no chance he would know her. He thinks that the primordial goddess does not even have the necessary qualifications to ascend the ancient road to the heavens. Shortly after, the group thanks the protagonist for saving their lives. As a reward, they offer him a pouch of money. Dao responds that money has no value to him, so it was good to simply talk with them. Thanks to that, he gained a different perspective on some matters. Thus, he starts interacting with the system screen again. As he begins to leave, he says that he has some things to do. For this reason, they will have to part ways. Moreover, he wants to remind them that gods are real. But in his eyes, gods are just people who are stronger than usual. Therefore, if they strive to reach that level and go beyond it, they can become gods in the eyes of the world. He says he hopes to see them again. At that moment, he disappears. Seeing this, the other nun wonders if Dao might be a god. She responds that he is above the goddess of light. Then the scene cuts to the protagonist with Qin, observing everything from above. Qin in turn says she still doesn't understand something. She asks why they had to save those insolent immortals. Dao replies that to undo chaos and revive the celestial path, mortals are the most important contributors. Moreover, it's about putting people first. Qin asks where they are going now. Shortly after, the boy appears to begin casting some kind of spell. He states that they are going directly to the underworld. The scene cuts to another location that apparently is the underworld. Several undead are surrounding the area. At that moment, a black portal appears and two blue meteors emerge. They collide on the ground and an unknown figure appears. It is then revealed that it is Dao. He says that this is truly the one unique place in the underworld. A spirit explains that this is the underworld, one of the three great realms and the place of death and reincarnation. Dao asks if that's true because all he sees is a pile of ruins and a few undead. Kitten says that the presence of such filth is polluting her master's eyes. For this reason, she intends to defeat them immediately. However, the boy asks her to wait. He says that these living beings are just mindless creatures and therefore have no reason to bother him. The system indicates that it is curious. It asks why the boy has no prejudice against the undead. Dao responds that the existence of the undead also follows the celestial Dao. He asks why they should be considered different from other races. The only reason is the cycle of reincarnation, which is currently broken. Therefore, they have all become wandering corpses without any intelligence. Qin, in turn, asks what they are going to do. At that moment, the two of them appear above that black sphere. Dao responds that they are going to rebuild the cycle of reincarnation. At that moment, the spirit asks them to wait because, while they can rebuild the cycle, it will require much of Dao's power to do so. Dao questions how weakened he will become exactly. The spirit says he could probably withstand one hit from a high-level celestial being. A second hit could even injure him. Basically, he cannot be disturbed during the recreation. Otherwise, it might fail. Dao in turn becomes pensive about that. Meanwhile, he begins to observe his servant. He seems to have an idea. Shortly after, he takes her by the hand, saying that only she can help him. At that moment, an aura begins to envelop the girl. Dao asks her to lend him her power, so they will recreate the cycle of reincarnation together. At that moment, a barrier begins to surround them both. Then the cycle of recreation starts and a light envelops the black sphere. The undead below are already watching everything. At that moment, a skeletal hand emerges from among the monsters. Confused, the monster wonders where his head is. He eventually finds his head and successfully returns to his normal form. However, he finds it very strange because it's not the time for reincarnation. Looking up, he is surprised. He says that light belongs to the celestial Dao. Therefore, it is likely repairing the cycle of reincarnation. He recalls that in the past, Yuan from the ancient savage city competed with him over the power of reincarnation. In the end, each of them obtained half of the power of the underworld. However, the cycle was damaged during that battle. Since then, the first and second great cycles have remained in this state. The underworld was clearly ignored in the past. He wonders why the current cycle wants to restore reincarnation. Furthermore, the appearance of the celestial Dao has changed. Previously, both a masculine and feminine form was used. He wonders what the boy could be plotting this time. But regardless of his intentions, since he dared to reveal his weakness, it wouldn't be polite. At that moment, one of the undead starts speaking, wondering whose it was. Shortly after, the undead begin to regain their consciousness. That monster thinks that acting rashly at this moment would lead to its destruction. But even so, it should wait to devise a new plan. Additionally, reestablishing reincarnation doesn't benefit only the undead. Therefore, it should forget all of that. Because of this, the Empress will spare him this time. He thinks there are still several powers in the underworld. Therefore, it would be a great show to watch. Next, the scene cuts to a group of monsters advancing toward the protagonist. Kitten in turn says it looks like some flies are approaching. Dao tells her not to get distracted because he still has his own plans. With the snap of his fingers, he appears in the midst of the monsters. However, it's not him, but a clone of his. Kitten asks why he created that clone. The protagonist says that, naturally, he has his reasons, thinking that if he left the defense to Qin, the underworld would probably be destroyed. Meanwhile, Dao's clone is talking to the monsters. He warns them that if they come any closer, they will be killed. However, some of them do not heed his warning. They charge directly at the protagonist's clone. He easily dodges all the attacks. At that moment, a lich appears behind him. It begins casting a spell and launches it at the boy's clone. However, the gravitational spell has no effect. Right after, another monster charges at him. Instead, it targets the original body. Qin warns that someone is trying to attack them from behind. However, Dao asks her not to get distracted, because they shouldn't underestimate his clone. In seconds, the clone appears behind that monster. He grabs its head and throws it to the ground. The monster is quickly defeated. The clone says he will play with them a bit more, so they shouldn't go too far. Another monster says that since he is alone, they should use this opportunity to attack all at once. Thus, all the monsters charge at him. However, it has no effect. Because the difference in power between them is immense, he orders them all to kneel. At that moment, all the monsters fall to the ground. Angrily, another monster says it cannot move. However, some of them are still not directly under his power. Even so, they are surprised because the aura of that clone alone was enough to suppress several powerful specialists. Meanwhile, one of the monsters among them seems to be laughing. It says it's been a long time since someone interesting came to the underworld, so it wants to see how strong that clone is. Another monster is surprised, noting that one guy is present. It mentions that in his previous life, that monster was the most powerful dragon rider of the East during the First Era. So after his death, he didn't dissipate and became a skeletal knight. Shortly after, another monster declares that the celestial treasure will be his, so anyone wishing to interfere must die. Then the protagonist's clone says that he won't get what he wants. At that moment, the monster begins a series of attacks. It strikes the other monsters at its side. Shortly after, it launches an attack on the protagonist's clone. However, it still seems overly confident in its power. At that moment, the clone punches the monster in the face. An explosion follows. The creature is defeated in a very easy manner. The monsters, watching this, are astonished at the power of the clone. They wonder if that was perhaps too strong. Shortly after, the protagonist's clone turns its gaze to the other monsters. The system provides information about each one. He is surprised that some monsters haven't tried to flee yet. Teleporting behind them, he asks if they really want to fight him. However, the other monster says it would not dare. It only wishes to know the purpose of his visit to the underworld. The clone says there's no need to ask because they will soon know the reason. At that moment, a light begins to shine behind them. The sphere where the protagonist is standing starts emitting a very bright light. The other monster says that it's not creating a new law, but rather, it's the very law of life and death. Furthermore, it is the reconstruction of the cycle of reincarnation. For someone to have such a great power, they must be extremely strong. The protagonist's clone, in turn, asks them not to guess, because they will soon know the truth. In seconds, something different happens. The undead begin to regain their human forms. Flesh and bones start to appear on all of them. The strange aura dissipates. As a result, reincarnation is now finally complete. The underworld should function properly as it always should have. Meanwhile, a girl seems to be laughing. She says that the boy truly is the celestial Tao, because he restored the souls of all beings in the underworld with extreme ease. For that reason, she needs to thank him somehow. The woman is the ghost empress, and as a consequence of all this, her body has been restored. Meanwhile, all the undead who are now human are extremely joyful about what happened. Another woman observes, saying that the souls of the undead are being restored. Normally, when a soul disperses, not even the strongest specialists could bring it back. However, another monster says it is possible, but only if that being is the celestial Tao. At that moment, the protagonist's clone disappears. As a result, Tao and Qin emerge. The monsters, seeing this, are stunned. They ask if the boy is truly the celestial Tao. Qin, irritated, asks if they are really doubting her master's identity. The protagonist asks her to remain calm. He confirms that he is indeed the celestial Tao. However, the monsters still seem hesitant to believe what they are seeing. Another monster says it still remembers the catastrophe of the Second Great Cycle. For that reason, it never wants to experience that feeling of despair again. Approaching the monster, the protagonist says he has a question to ask. He mentions that he noticed many powerful specialists avoided the two great battles. He asks if the monster could explain what happened. The monster replies that it was due to the inner world. As long as there were sufficient resources in that place, they would be able to survive with that animalistic power. The protagonist thinks that they are relying on the limited resources of this world to resist all of this. He then asks if they have the power to unite and resist the power of the celestial Tao. The other monster responds that working together to resist the celestial Tao's power would only reduce the few survivors to even fewer. Shortly after, the monster asks if it can pose a question. It questions why Tao caused the catastrophe. After asking the spirit if he said he was forced to become the celestial Tao, they might believe him. However, the spirit responds that they wouldn't understand the fact that the celestial Tao could be replaced. Having no other choice, Tao thinks he should put the blame on that. He explains that those in his realm are already ultimate beings and would inevitably exchange the reconstruction of the law. However, the power of the law is not something everyone can sustain. No one wants to see others holding this power. As a consequence, they end up fighting among themselves. The opportunities that the celestial Tao provides are distributed equally among all beings, but they gradually become controlled by a small number of specialists. For this reason, they should take the underworld's cycle of reincarnation as an example, because due to the conflicts that occurred in the ancient savage city, the ghost emperor of the Second Great Cycle was eventually split in half and taken away. Since then, reincarnation has ceased. This led to the current tragic state of the underworld. Therefore, destroying the world allows more people to survive. Otherwise, with the greed of those specialists, the world would have been completely destroyed long ago. The other monster says that in the past, they were too focused on enhancing their power. They didn't care about anything else. Tao responds that even the strongest people can make mistakes. The important thing is how to make amends. For this reason, he is giving them an opportunity. He asks if they are willing to join his organization. Qin responds that these beings are too weak to stand alongside him. However, the protagonist replies that the combined effort of all beings is necessary to maintain the celestial Tao's order, and even though they are weak in comparison, within the three realms they're already at the peak of existence. So he can say that the cycle of reincarnation is still incomplete. It has a natural mechanism to absorb souls directly into the cycle. However, for those above the level of the celestial Tao, the cycle of reincarnation has little power over them. In such cases, beings like them are needed. Thus, they must force souls to reincarnate. For this reason, he calls this profession ghost hunters. Furthermore, he has already decided on the name of the organization, Hades. He asks if they are willing to join. Meanwhile, Qin, with a threatening look, watches the monsters. As a result, they all accept the boy's offer. However, another monster says it is willing to serve but has some conditions. Qin, irritated, asks how a mere being could make demands. The protagonist asks her to stay calm, because mutual benefits could be long-lasting. The monster then responds that it wants the protagonist to heal its wounds. It then reveals a strange mark on its body. It says that the wound was left by the primordial demon wolf and requires sap from the tree of life to heal. Hearing this information, Dao says that he indeed needs to visit that place in the future. He says he will agree to do it, affirming that things are going well. However, his organization needs a manager. Qin, hearing what the boy said, responds that she has a recommendation. She mentions that Yu Ming is definitely the best candidate to manage his organization. At that moment, the protagonist begins pulling some data on the woman. Dao questions if she could be revived, and the spirit responds affirmatively. Then the boy asks to bring her immediately. The scene then shifts to the protagonist and Qin heading to a location. The girl then says she has a question. She states that he could easily heal the other's wounds with minimal effort. She asks why he is purposed in making a trip to that forest. Dao responds that she wouldn't understand, because only this way is like collecting quests from an NPC. Hearing what the boy said, Qin looks confused. At that moment, the two arrive at the destined location. Dao, in turn, observes everything in silence. In front of him is a chained girl who is apparently the person he was looking for. He approaches her, lifting her chin. He thinks her body is still intact. He mentions that although she had been sealed there after death, her aura is still inferior to Qin's. The spirit says that among the 5 celestial incarnations, Qin's strength is the weakest. The protagonist responds that it's fine, and they should proceed to revive Yu Ming quickly. At that moment, a system screen appears before the boy. It asks if he is sure if he wants to revive her. The boy, in turn, asks if this means that if the girl dies again, her power would be lost permanently. If that's the case, he needs to be more cautious. Therefore, he decides to give her 1% of his power. He then takes out a blue sphere from his body. As a result, an immense burst of light envelops the area. Meanwhile, the group of monsters is still waiting for the protagonist. The burst is so powerful that it reaches all of them. It even gets close to the woman from earlier. Surprised, she wonders what the celestial Dao is doing, assuming he realized the girl was not dead. At that moment, Dao grabs the microorganism again. He remarks that he forgot to control his aura when releasing his power. He thinks he didn't expect that just 1% of his power would be so terrifying. Shortly after, he approaches the girl again. He transfers that 1% of his power into her body. A light begins to envelop the area. At that moment, the girl opens her eyes. She immediately grabs the protagonist, saying that she is finally reunited with him. With tears in her eyes, she says he is now her master. Intervening, Qin tells her she doesn't need to be so close to speak. Then Dao observes the girl. She kneels, thanking him for his kindness, saying she will not disappoint him this time. Dao then says that he has a mission for her. He tells her that from this day on, she will be the chief manager of his agency. Therefore, she has only one task: to contribute and maintain the security of the cycle of reincarnation. The spirit comments that this seems like 2 tasks, and the protagonist asks if there is a problem with that. Observing, Qin thinks that Yu Ming's personality is very different from hers. But that's a good thing, because she would go mad if Yu Ming acted the same way as Qin. Shortly after, the girl asks if the protagonist won't stay in the underworld. Qin replies that their master still has other matters to handle, so she should take care of the underworld on her own. The protagonist says that since she is one of his celestial incarnations, she should have more confidence in her responsibilities. Moreover, he has already reconstructed the cycle of reincarnation. Now she only needs to become the king of Hades. The girl replies that she understands. Then she begins to shout, calling all forms of life to listen to her. She declares that she is the celestial incarnation of Yu Ming, and in the future, she will be the head of the organization, helping the protagonist manage the underworld. Those who used to be craftsmen will help with design, while the greater undead will oversee construction. The powerful undead will enter the human realm as spirits to guide the souls. Therefore, if anyone fails in their duty, they will certainly be killed. Furthermore, they will become enemies of the celestial Tao. The protagonist, observing the girl, says that she is truly frightening. The spirit says that the girl was the leader of the Yu Ming clan when she was alive. For that reason, it seems that leaving the underworld in her hands will be without problems. Qin, in turn, asks where they are heading next. The boy responds that they are going to the Elven Forest. Shortly after, a scene cuts to that forest. A group of people seems to be there. They mention that the elves they captured this time are truly of high quality. Meanwhile, an unknown girl is inside a cell. Apparently, she remains silent. One of the men tells the other not to be careless, because until they leave the forest, they should remain alert. The other man says that their leader is very brave and asks who would dare block their path. But at that moment, someone does. A dark figure appears to surround them. The man, irritated, asks how they dared to do such a thing. At that moment, the spirit points its finger at them, pointing directly at the cell where the elf is being held. The man, irritated, asks if they are trying to steal his loot. At that moment, the spirit grabs its weapon. The men start laughing at the spirit because it wields a spear on foot. At that moment, it begins to form a magic circle. It summons a dragon above it, leaving the man very surprised by what he sees. Meanwhile, the elves are observing the situation, hoping they will indeed be rescued. However, another elf in the background thinks that's not true, because if it were the great elven god, the exclusive elven angel of the great god would be present, but this figure is dark. The other man says he doesn't care about their origins. If they want slaves, they can give them a few. However, the spirit responds that it doesn't want just a few. It points out that it wants all the slaves. This makes the man furious at what he hears. He then orders his group to charge at the creature. At that moment, the dragon breathes fire. It incinerates part of the man's soldiers, and then it charges again at his army, easily taking them all down. The leader observes this and is stunned. He begs the monster not to come closer. In seconds, the clone releases the cage, successfully freeing all the elves. One of the girls, in turn, thanks him for it. At that moment, the other man appears above the clone. However, even that is not enough. In seconds, he is killed. The remaining soldiers see this and start to flee. But it is already too late, because the group of elves has already arrived to help. Another elf tells the girl to observe. He says that is the divine dragon knight who has saved their kin. Shortly after, another elf says he plans to sell all the humans to the nobles. The spirit notices this. At that moment, it transforms into a clone of that elf. It successfully shoots an arrow into his skull. As a result, the elf is easily defeated. Another elf, seeing this, calls for everyone to prepare. However, another elf intervenes, asking them not to fight. She states that the man has done nothing wrong because she can sense that he treats all forms of life fairly. The other elf asks what she means by that. At that moment, the spirit begins to release the elf's bindings. They thank the man for his kindness. The elf says that since the appearance of the spirit is adhered to a single rule, this rule is to attack only those who traffic other beings, regardless of whether they are bandits or warriors. So as long as they do not engage in the slave trade, the spirit will not attack them. Shortly after, the elf makes an announcement stating that no one is allowed to take prisoners. In seconds, the spirit disappears, and the other elf thanks it for its help. The scene then cuts to the protagonist sneezing. He says he's fine, just felt a tickle in his nose. Meanwhile, he observes everything happening below. Kin, in turn, mentions that something's going on down there. The protagonist responds that it's simply the law he created earlier. Shortly after, a fireball begins to appear behind the boy. It quickly falls to the ground. From it, some monsters emerge. The elf is surprised by this. At that moment, the souls of the dead creatures exit their bodies. They are quickly captured, because all of them will be sent directly to the underworld. The other elf asks what she is waiting for, saying they should return home. Observing all of this, Dao remarks that the underworld and the cycle of reincarnation seem to be functioning well. Kin is surprised, realizing that all of this is due to her master's actions. Dao thinks that it's time to move on to his next destination, which is the tree before him, the elven capital. The scene then cuts to the city of the elves. Another elf announces that all the slaves will be responsible for cleaning the city from that moment on. They hand out brooms to the slaves. Looking up, a girl observes something. She thinks that she's finally home. Shortly after, a carriage passes by her side. The girl watches the person inside. At that moment, someone begins to exit the carriage. The protagonist, alongside Kin, appears and remarks that there are elves everywhere. He suggests they disguise their ears to blend into the city. Meanwhile, a man walks by asking his servant how many minerals those inferior races mine each day. While an elf seems to be begging for money to eat, Dao comments that he has nothing against the nobles, but there is a vast gap between the rich and the poor, and it's truly depressing. At that moment, the spirit appears, saying that the celestial Dao could easily put an end to it. However, the boy asks him to stop talking nonsense. He explains that to achieve equality, the oppressed need to resist on their own. A third-party intervention would only turn them into victims of another Arthur. The spirit notes that the boy is increasingly becoming the celestial Dao, and the protagonist says he will take that as a compliment. He observes the state of the world tree and asks if it has any connection with the elves. Kim, in turn, asks if her master wishes to meet the elven goddess. The boy replies that he does. Kim then suggests that she could set the world tree on fire, and at that moment, the woman would definitely appear. However, Dao asks her to wait as he only wishes to speak with her, so there's no need for fights. Kin warns that the woman was a rebel during the second cycle. Therefore, there's nothing to discuss. But the young man responds that's precisely why it's even more important to talk to her, because he needs to understand what those rebels think about all of this. He mentions that those who make more friends will have fewer enemies. For this reason, they should gather as many allies as possible. At that moment, a commotion begins as a girl rides a runaway carriage. She approaches the protagonist and Qin, shouting for them to get out of the way. It's the elven princess, who says she won't take responsibility if they get hurt. The carriage rushes toward the protagonist but ends up passing by him without harm. The system informs him that she is the Golden Princess, currently at the mid-stage of the Third Order. The protagonist questions if this is how nobles teach their children, as they should correct their behavior. At that moment, a blonde-haired elf passes by the boy. Meanwhile, the princess is about to run over an elderly man. The elf quickly intervenes and saves him, asking if he's okay. Watching the scene, the girl wonders why the elves have become like this. The old man thanks the elf for her help. The protagonist steps forward, saying that she possesses rare kindness in this feudal society. The elf asks who the boy is, and he replies that he is just a curious person. He then asks if the elven princess has always been this rude, and the elderly man replies that it's not just the princess. All the nobles act this way. Their fates are decided from birth, as the golden elves and moon elves are nobility, while the others are merely craftsmen. Additionally, some are not yet slaves. However, the other elf disagrees, stating that the status of the people was never determined by birth and asking why he thinks that way. The old man explains that it is due to lifespan, noting that gray elves have a life expectancy of only 1,000 years, while the golden elves can live for over 5,000 years. Dao observes that elves live a long time, and the system confirms that, but the price is a low fertility rate, which is also a law of the heavens. The stronger the being, the less likely they are to have children. Dao asks if he could have a baby, and the system responds that it depends. The boy questions if he wants to have a child himself or make others have them. Hearing this, Qin gets excited, asking if her master wants to have a child, and if so, she could help him. The old man notes that young people are indeed energetic and thanks the elf, saying he will be on his way. The other elf comments that her race should not be like this. Dao responds that the elves of this time are very different from those during her reign, asking if he is correct. The girl reveals that she is in fact the ancient goddess and mother of the elves. At that moment, the elf activates her power, questioning who the boy really is. The protagonist asks if she doesn't recognize the celestial Dao. The elf responds that it's impossible, as she has seen the celestial Dao before, and he was completely different from him. The boy thinks he needs to explain differently. He snaps his fingers and a massive barrier envelops the city. The elf is surprised, realizing her power is being blocked. Dao then grabs her, asking if she believes him now. The elf, confused, wonders when he got so close. She pulls her hand away, saying she needs to make her first move. In response, she begins to cast a spell, but Qin intervenes, asking how she dares to be rude to her master. She probably desires his death. The elf reflects that her soul only started to recover recently, and her current strength barely reaches the peak of the 6th layer, so she needs to flee. She starts casting a teleportation spell. At that moment, she vanishes. Dao notes that it's a 5th rank elven magic spell, and such a thing is rare in this world. But unfortunately, she's facing the celestial Dao, and for that reason, it won't work. It is then revealed that the girl failed to teleport and is stuck against the barrier. She falls to the ground. Thinking it's impossible, she cannot believe that even teleportation doesn't work against the barrier. At that moment, Qin immobilizes the elf. Qin says she has finally caught her. Dao, in turn, tells her that she can release the elf now. However, Qin responds that this is the mother goddess of the elves and that she is a rebel who goes against the heavens. The young man insists that she release her again, so Qin complies with the protagonist's request. The young man asks once again if the elf now believes he is the celestial Dao. However, the elf still seems reluctant. Approaching her, Dao tells her not to be nervous, as he only wants to ask a few questions. The elf thinks that in this situation, even Halshan wouldn't be able to escape, so the only way she might survive now is by cooperating. She decides to answer the young man's questions. As his first question, Dao asks what the rebels' plan is. The elf responds that she has no idea. Even though she was a member of the rebels in the 2nd cycle, she doesn't know of any plan against them in this 3rd era. An elven god is considered only a moderate force among the rebels, so it's normal that she wouldn't have that information. For his second question, the protagonist asks why she hates the heavens. The girl explains that in the 1st great cycle, she was a goddess born from the world tree. Together, they protected the birth and growth of the elves, and those prosperous and happy times remain vivid in her memory. However, at the end of the 1st cycle, she witnessed a catastrophe with her own eyes. She barely survived while the world tree was reduced to a mere seed. She asks if the boy still questions why she hates the heavens because that question doesn't even make sense. The protagonist says that the action of the former celestial Dao destroying all beings led to deep hatred. As his final question, he asks what she considers the most important thing. The girl, deep in thought, replies that she only wishes to survive and protect her people forever. Dao then questions if she is truly willing to do that. The elf asks what he means by that, and the protagonist responds that actions speak louder than words. For that reason, she should see the truth with her own eyes. In seconds, the two are teleported. The scene cuts to the elven forest's mine. Dao, along with the elf and Qin, appears in the area. Dao explains that this place is where her people call a good place for wealth creation. where slavery is considered normal, and many suffer as a result. The elf, enraged upon seeing the situation, wonders how they could have the audacity to treat her people like that. Dao, in turn, is disappointed, noting that he was only able to stop human trafficking, and if it were pure slavery, the black figure would not appear. Hearing what the boy said, the elf is surprised, realizing that those black figures were his doing. The elf then asks why he doesn't set the rule for pure slavery as well. The boy responds that she seems to have misunderstood, because the source of slavery isn't just human trafficking. Prisoners of war are also criminals and slaves. He asks if she also wants to save those kinds of people. The elf reflects that what she despises is human trafficking. However, if such killings and abuses continue, it would be very bad. Shortly after, the boy asks the elf not to place the responsibility on him. The girl says she doesn't understand why the protagonist has the power to change the world, yet he still refuses to save those people. Dao then asks her to think about it. He questions what they did when the celestial Dao tried to change the world. He asks her to explain why the realm of the earth became a barren land, and moreover, why the heavens and the world possessed the most resources. The elf says they only want to have a better life. The protagonist asks if that's why they needed to obtain the power of the celestial Dao, because it seems like her people were also just seeking a better life by oppressing their own kind. The elf responds that this isn't true. She says it's because the boy wants to absorb the power of all beings to become stronger. For this reason, they had to resist. Dao explains that his power comes from all living things, so the death of those beings would also weaken his power. He questions why the previous celestial Dao preferred to destroy all beings instead of eliminating only the most powerful. Confused, the girl responds that she doesn't know how to answer that question. Then Dao tells her that even if she doesn't know everything, she is still capable of recognizing what she holds in her hands. Seeing what was in front of her, the elf appears surprised. Dao asks if she has noticed. He explains that the figure is her, to be precise, right after she woke up. During the second cycle, at that moment, she had drained all the spring aura. The purpose of the spring aura was to resurrect the world tree and give it its own vitality. He asks if she knew that it was the source of life that brought the entire continent back to life. Therefore, she should know how many widows would have been born if she hadn't taken that source. Shortly after, the girl collapses to the ground, saying she knew all of that. But even so, she still wanted to live. So if she hadn't destroyed all beings, she wouldn't have needed to use that source. The protagonist then asks why the previous celestial Dao chose to destroy her if she hadn't stolen the opportunity given to all by the heavenly beings. Because some people end up suffering due to their own greed, and now she's just facing the same problem as the celestial Dao. He asks what kind of response she would give if she were face to face with the fallen elves. At that moment, an elf transmits an alert. He announces that the rebel dark elves are invading. But in the next instant, the man is killed. Another man introduces himself as Shadnal, the leader of the dark elves' resistance. He declares that he is there to free them, and for that reason, they should raise their weapons. He then distributes weapons to the elves. With a threatening look, the elves begin to observe their kin who were enslaving them. They start to defeat those who were oppressing them. The other goddess, standing alongside the protagonist, silently watches everything. Tears streaming down her face, the girl seems unable to believe what she is seeing. She says that this is not how things were supposed to happen. The protagonist asks what she would do if she could stop everything. Furthermore, if the root of the problem isn't addressed, similar things will keep happening. The elf says it's all because of the protagonist. If she still had her power, she wouldn't have let this happen. Kin, in turn, asks if the rebel still hasn't learned her lesson. The protagonist says that she really hasn't understood anything. Because in the second cycle, the elves were already divided into upper and lower classes. In the second cycle, the golden elves who were close to her were already nobles, and the dark elves were isolated. The dark elves were never considered the same race and were treated as inferior beings. It was because the celestial Dao witnessed all that suffering that he chose to destroy everything. And as the mother goddess of the elves, she did not take care of her own people. Hearing what the boy said, she finally understands. She admits that she wasn't a qualified mother goddess. The protagonist tells her to stop crying because, when faced with a problem, one should find a way to solve it. The elf replies that she is too weak, and that's why she has no power to act. Dao asks if she didn't resist when she was weak, questioning where that courage was when she stood against the heavens. If she showed even half of it, the elves might change their perspective. Hearing his words, she falls silent. She then says that now she finally knows what she must do. Dao, in turn, asks what she plans to do. The girl responds that she wants to go to the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress. For that reason, she intends to ask what their demands are. Dao says that she knows she must always listen to the voice of the people. And for that reason, since she understands this, as a reward, he will give her a ride to that place. He opens a portal, telling them to go there immediately. Kin asks why the protagonist is helping, and the boy replies that having a friend is better than having an enemy. Watching this situation, the elf finds it amusing. She realizes that she knows absolutely nothing about the celestial Dao. They then step through the portal. The scene shifts to the fortress of the Dark Elf Resistance. At that moment, the elf alongside the protagonist appears there. Dao announces that he has stopped hiding her presence so the elves can see her. The girl begins to approach the cave entrance. The group of elves starts preparing. Shortly after, they fire arrows at the girl. Dao states that she is the mother goddess of the elves, and for that reason, mere arrows will not kill her. The elf responds that although she hasn't fully recovered, she is not so weak as to be defeated by mere arrows. In that instant, she easily deflects the attacks. The group of elves is surprised, realizing that the magic she used could only be performed by a 5th-rank mage. Then another elf charges at her, saying it doesn't matter what her origin is, as the golden elves must die. At that moment, the elf begins casting a spell. She restrains all the elves in the area. The protagonist, observing the situation, notes that even at the initial stages of the 4th Order, the power of the Dark Elves is not insignificant. He adds that such power is rare among human nations. Sensing an unusual presence, the elf remarks that someone is approaching. Shortly after, a creature appears, stating that those elves are no match for her. After all, that person is the very mother goddess of the elves. The elf, recognizing the creature, is surprised. She realizes that it is the goddess of the Dark Elves. Dao, on the other hand, is thoughtful about the situation. He begins using a spell to analyze the creature's stats. He wonders why she is at the 5th layer. He recalls that the current elven goddess was at least at the pinnacle of the celestial layer. Moreover, the difference between them wasn't that great. The spirit explains that there are 2 types of gods: natural gods and gods of faith. Natural gods, born from the will of the heavens, are usually born with extreme power. Meanwhile, gods of faith draw strength from the beliefs of others, and if the believers are few, their strength weakens or even disappears. Dao concludes that given this, the current situation of the Dark Elves isn't good. Shortly after, the scene shifts to the creature saying she is glad the elf isn't dead. She draws her weapon and charges at the elf, declaring that she will take great pleasure in defeating her. The elf asks what she means, explaining that she is there to help the Dark Elves. The Dark Elf goddess questions if her memory is damaged, reminding her that the Dark Elves suffered injustice while she still ruled. Now things are much worse. She declares that only by defeating her and stripping her of her divinity can the Dark Elves be saved. For this reason, she and those helpers she brought could go to the underworld. Dao then intervenes, asking if they could avoid dragging him into elven affairs. He snaps his fingers, and as a result, all the elves freeze. The Dark Elf goddess is shocked, asking why everyone has stopped moving. Dao assures her not to worry, explaining that he merely stopped time. However, the girl still doesn't believe it, insisting that it's impossible for anyone to stop time. Dao responds that ordinary people indeed cannot accomplish such a feat. However, for the celestial Dao, it's nothing special. The creature is astonished, remembering that the celestial Dao was the one who destroyed the world in the 1st and 2nd cycles. She asks if the boy is truly the celestial Dao, to which he confirms he is. Observing the situation, the creature notes that even the mother goddess doesn't seem to deny his claim. Kneeling, the girl apologizes for her rudeness, hoping that the celestial Dao can forgive her. The boy says it's fine, as he was only wandering by to see the show, but the elves still need to ask their goddess about these matters. The Dark Elf goddess begins speaking, admitting that she is neither a qualified goddess nor a competent creator. She says that self-blame will not save the Dark Elves. What they need right now is power and revenge. The elf goddess acknowledges that she knows well how they feel. Her current state is the same as when she fought against the heavens. In her mind, she only thought about resisting oppression and would do whatever it took to achieve her revenge. And when she created the elven race, she gave them corresponding characteristics and symbols. The golden elves are the sun and light. The moon elves represent the moon and night, along with the forest elves symbolizing trees, and so on, creating a cycle alongside the dark elves, who are shadows and spiders. In her eyes, all elves should be equal, and she hoped they could all abandon their hatred and live in peace. The Dark Elf goddess, irritated, asks if she expects her to explain this to the Dark Elves who were oppressed to death by the Golden Elves. She insists that only by spilling blood can they console the families of the Dark Elves who lost their loved ones. Therefore, if the Elf goddess truly wishes to help the Dark Elves, she must join her in killing the Elf King and all the Golden Elves who commit evil. However, the elf responds that she could not do that because the Dark Elves and the Golden Elves are both her children, and she couldn't bear to lose any of them. Frustrated, the Dark Elf goddess questions why she is saying such nonsense, arguing that if that were the case, she should be supporting the Golden Elves. At that moment, the protagonist intervenes in the conversation. He mentions that she said the Dark Elves have always desired resistance, so he's curious about one thing: what she plans to do once the resistance succeeds. The girl replies that she would make the Golden Elves suffer for everything they had done. Dao, however, asks if it isn't the Dark Elves who hate the idea of ruling cruelly. The woman insists that she is not like those selfish Golden Elves and only wishes for the Dark Elves to live in peace. Dao tells her that if she truly thinks differently from the Golden Elves, she should not act the same way as they do. It's a matter of morality. And if she wants to fight the Golden Elves for power, she shouldn't claim the Dark Elves are suffering. If she truly seeks justice, she must not repeat the actions of the Golden Elves. Hearing his words, she falls silent. She comments that the Golden Elves have done terrible things to her clan and must be punished for everything they've done. Dao explains that there is always a price to pay for wrongdoing, but that price is not to enslave the Golden Elves for generations. At that moment, another creature sighs. It says it now understands the situation. For that reason, it won't do anything as long as the dark elves can live a normal life. Dao, in turn, feels satisfied that the matter has finally been resolved. The elf apologizes to the boy, saying that it was supposed to be an internal matter, yet it involved him. Dao responds that it's no problem, as this encounter with the elves has given him some ideas. He says that while the elves are her responsibility, all the races across the 3 worlds are the celestial Dao's concern. He then asks how she plans to resolve the situation, and she replies that she already knows everything about it. For that reason, she needs to speak with the current elven emperor, and if they cannot reach an agreement, she will use force. Dao advises that force doesn't solve problems, it only deals with enemies. The elf states that if they cannot have a conversation, then the golden elves and those supporting them will be her enemies. The protagonist says she has already discovered how to resolve the situation, and for that reason, you will watch to witness the outcome. They begin to leave the area, heading toward the elven palace. At that moment, the scene shifts to that location. A cup shatters. An elf, humiliating another, scolds her for not adding less sugar, explaining that she's been trying to lose weight recently. She asks if the girl thinks she's joking. Looking to the side, she asks if the girl has prepared the afternoon tea. Watching her mistress, the elf becomes desperate. She pleads with the girl to spare her, saying she made a mistake. The elf asks if she thinks everything will be fine just by apologizing. Meanwhile, another elf watches the entire scene from above. She wonders how those elves could treat their own kind this way. Dao asks if she can't bear to witness such things and remarks that she might explode if he shows her another situation. He directs her to look at another part of the building. An elf appears to be escorting 2 girls. He instructs them not to waste time and to hurry. Next, a butler knocks on a room door. He announces that the new servants have arrived. Shortly after, the man inside commends the butler for his good work, mentioning that it seems there will be something to do today. The elf, watching all of this, remains silent. Dao, in turn, asks how she feels in that moment. The elf replies that this is the current reality of the elves. For that reason, there's no need to negotiate with the royalty. At that moment, she begins to cast a spell. As a result, the giant tree begins to glow. In an instant, the entire ground starts to tremble. People in desperation begin to kneel, assuming that the goddess is extremely angry. Shortly after, the earthquake stops abruptly. A group of panicked people starts running, fearing that the people of the tree have lost control. Giant monsters begin to appear in the area. A voice echoes, calling for them to respond to its summons. In a matter of seconds, a massive dragon emerges. It begins to watch the giant tree. In that instant, it lets out a roar. The scene shifts to the celestial realm of the elven gods. A man notices something, wondering why the world tree has suddenly become enraged. He suspects that someone may have returned. Shortly after, he instructs his servants to pause for a moment. He asks where his guards are. Immediately, they appear, asking their god for his orders. The man commands them to descend and investigate what has happened to the world tree. If they discover that it is their enemy, they are to destroy it immediately. The 3 servants comply and follow his orders. The scene then shifts to the giant monster watching the clouds. It realizes that something significant is happening. Shortly after, it calls one of its servants. It orders them to gather all the hidden dark elves because a battle of the gods is about to begin. The scene then shifts to the palace. Inside, there appears to be commotion. The elven goddess observes the situation. At that moment, the man from earlier appears, questioning who these people are. It also demands to know why she has enraged the world tree. The elf responds that he doesn't need to know who she is. She explains that she only wants to bring an end to the elven nobility and make them pay the price for oppressing their own kind. Hearing her words, the man starts laughing. He says it seems she hasn't understood something. Even with the help of the dark elves and the world tree, she won't be able to defeat the reign of the golden elves. He explains that the god of the golden elves is the current elven god and one of the western gods of the heavens. The girl responds, asking if that's all he has to say because if so, it seems there's nothing left for them to discuss. The man, hearing her response, asks if she thinks she can escape at this moment. He signals with his fingers and a group of archers begins preparing an attack. However, the mages accompanying the girl seem ready for this. Dao observes and notes that all of them are specialists above the 5th layer, advising caution. The elf questions why he said they wanted to unite the elves when even the elves themselves didn't want to listen to her. Dao tells her not to ask him, reminding her that when she rebelled against the heavens, she had asked the same question. Shortly after, the man asks if those will be her last words. He orders his subordinates to defeat them. The elf replies that this is the war he has chosen. With tears in her eyes, she asks not to be blamed for what will happen next. In that instant, a giant monster appears in the area. With a menacing gaze, it begins watching all the elves. The monsters start attacking the city. Immediately, the man orders the activation of the protection spell. The monster launches an attack. It strikes the barrier. However, behind the monster is a dragon. It unleashes its attack on the barrier. Successfully, the barrier is shattered. The other elf, completely panicked, realizes they no longer have their protection spell and the city's defenses have been breached. Seeing the barrier crumble, the monsters advance further. The panicked soldiers start fleeing. However, it is all in vain. The general orders his troops not to panic, instructing them to return to their normal formation. They begin trying to stop the advancing monsters. Meanwhile, the elven god observes everything from above. He is surprised that even ancient monsters and the celestial dragon are present. Nevertheless, he insists it doesn't matter. He remarks that he doesn't know how the girl managed all this, but they will still emerge victorious in the end. The elf asks what he means. The man instructs her to look up. At that moment, a beam of light pierces the sky. The girl, astonished, wonders what it is. Descending from the light, 3 angels appear. A girl introduces herself as Katarine, the angel queen of the elven gods, sent by the current elven god to suppress the rebels. Dao, counting, notices that they have 4 pairs of wings. He remarks that they have indeed sent an elven angel queen. For this reason, he concludes that their intent is to directly destroy the entire world tree. The elf responds that she cannot let that happen. Dao replies that he fears there may be problems if they enter the human world without suppressing their power. In that moment, a lightning bolt strikes, heading directly toward the angel. However, she quickly perceives it. Within seconds, she draws her sword, managing to deflect the lightning. Dao comments that the celestial punishment for specialists entering the human world doesn't seem strong enough. Summoning the system, Dao declares his intention to change the rule regarding celestial punishment in the human world. He specifies that withstanding or breaking the celestial punishment will not be counted as passing the trial. It will trigger a new celestial punishment. After the duration of 1 incense stick burning, another punishment should descend with its power at a level higher than that of the violator. Moreover, this cycle should continue until the individual is exterminated. Satisfied with the changes, Dao notes that he now has the time it takes for an incense stick to burn before a level 10 Emperor lightning strike hits. The elf remarks that she thought he would eliminate the girl immediately. Dao responds that it wasn't easy for her to descend. For that reason, he wants to treat her as a gift for the elf goddess and let her have some fun. At that moment, the clouds begin to glow again. Numerous lightning bolts start descending from the sky once more. Katarina, surprised, wonders if she had already broken the lightning trigger or why lightning was forming again. She decides to end the battle quickly. At that moment, a voice calls out to her. The dragon questions if she truly wants to become an enemy of the world tree. The elf goddess apologizes, stating that she is under the command of the elven god. The dragon replies that the elven god has gained a bit of attention and now believes he truly is a god. However, Katarina demands that he not insult her god again. She orders her forces to protect the elven palace, stating she will deal with the world tree herself. Observing this, the dragon remarks that she is being overly arrogant, questioning if she thinks he will be defeated just because he has been suppressed. Katarina responds that for the elven god, even with her full power, she would not be afraid to face him. The dragon charges at her, eager to test her abilities. However, the elf goddess intervenes, asking to handle the situation herself. Recognizing his goddess, the dragon is surprised. He realizes she is still alive. The elf responds that she had indeed been killed before, but seeing the state of the elves now, she cannot rest in peace. She begins an incantation, asking the world tree to lend her its strength. In that instant, the giant tree begins to glow. From it, a spirit emerges. Qin, witnessing the situation, is surprised as the tree produces 6 great fruits. Meanwhile, Dao observes everything from above. Irritated, he questions how those could be called fruits. He says they are obviously mystical realms. He notes that if just one elven goddess possesses fruits of the 6 mystical realms, it would have required significant resources for those in the reverse celestial king layer. The spirit asks Dao if he wants to eliminate her. However, Dao asks not to rush things as they have remained hidden for many years, and it no longer matters. At that moment, the spirits take different directions. They head toward the elf goddess. Consequently, they enter her body. The stronger elf declares that she wants to see what the elf goddess is truly made of. Katarina, observing the elf, asks who she is. At that moment, Belucia begins casting a spell. She announces that she is the elven goddess. However, the angel still doesn't believe her, questioning if she's the elven goddess and asking who the other lord is. Belucia replies that he is merely a rebel. Even so, the angel doesn't believe her and charges at the goddess. The goddess begins her incantation. Katarina's attack hits her. However, she has already erected a protective barrier. Katarina, astonished, questions how such divine power could exist in the human realm. Lelouch responds that the power hidden within the human realm far exceeds Katarina's imagination. Looking back, she instructs the dragon to assist the dark elves in overthrowing the golden elves. The dragon follows her command and roars. Hearing this, all the monsters begin charging toward the palace. Shortly after, Mira calls out, asking the dragon to wait. He questions why the dragon is betraying the elves. The dragon replies that the one he is loyal to has never been the elf king. Mihir then declares that he will not show leniency to the dragon. At that moment, another elf appears. He tells Mihir that he should worry about himself instead. At that moment, an attack strikes Mihir, who barely manages to defend himself. The elf comments that the golden elf's armor is of impressive quality. Mihir then asks if the young man is with the rebels. The young man responds that he has always been one of them. Hearing this, Mihir becomes enraged. The scene then shifts to another. A boy watches the battle from above, observing a yellow globe. He comments that the dragon and the monsters have completely turned against them. He notes that the third legion has been thrown into complete disarray by the monsters of his own legion. Meanwhile, the fourth and fifth legions, along with the rest, are stationed outside the city. Both have been attacked by wild beasts. Concerned, the girl wonders what she should do. The scene then cuts to another monster raising its weapon. It declares that the crusade against the Elven Emperor has officially begun. The Elven god, observing everything, is furious. He calls them an inferior race. At that moment, the dragon launches an attack toward the Elven god. However, the other elf goddess manages to defend against the attack. The dragon states that his army can no longer protect him. He warns that there will come a day when the Elven god will be killed. The Elven god retorts, asking if the dragon realizes the situation he's in. He points out that it's 3 against 1 and the dragon has no chance of winning. At that moment, the elf goddess behind him takes the hit. It is revealed that Kin is also aiding the dragon. The Elven god declares that now is 2 against 2. The scene then shifts to another elf charging at Leloucha. She attacks, even managing to shatter Leloucha's barrier. However, the elf goddess quickly invokes another barrier. The assailant continues her sequence of attacks, trying to break through again. Leloucha remarks that even if a celestial-level martial artist approached her, they wouldn't be able to defeat her in 3 moves. She begins casting a spell. She asks the girl to surrender because she cannot defeat her before the celestial punishment is delivered. She then launches a series of attacks at the girl. The assailant draws her sword again. She questions why Leloucha wishes to shatter the peace they have attained with their minds. Leloucha responds that she knows this peace was carefully achieved but was built upon the bodies of others to gain prosperity. She insists that everything about it is wrong. Such a state is something the Elven race does not need at all. She then prepares a massive attack. The elves, watching everything, assume a meteor is falling and that they are probably doomed. At that moment, the elf tries to flee, believing the meteor will not harm the elf king. She charges toward the meteor, colliding with it. The meteor shatters upon impact. As a result, the girl falls unconscious. She lies on the ground, seemingly defeated. Leloucha approaches the girl, saying that she is truly a gentle child. However, she states that such gentleness will not change the Elven race. The girl begins to rise. She asserts that the Elven race does not need to change in any way. At that moment, she grabs Leloucha. Confused, Leloucha asks what she's trying to do, as this action cannot harm her. The girl replies that it is enough. At that moment, the sky begins to glow again. The elf declares that while she cannot kill, she can at least inflict some damage with this attack. For that reason, they should meet their end together. In an instant, a massive bolt of lightning begins to fall from the sky. It heads toward the two. But at that moment, Dao snaps his fingers. As a result, the attack dissipates. The two are stunned as the lightning vanishes unexpectedly. The protagonist remarks that using celestial punishment maliciously to harm others is like putting the cart before the horse. He summons the system, stating that it seems the rules still need some adjustments. From now on, celestial punishments will only harm the person who triggers them and will not affect any other being. The system confirms that all rules have been updated. As Dao begins to leave, he tells them they may continue their fight and shouldn't mind him. The girl watching the protagonist asks what kind of person he is. She thinks that anyone who can stop lightning so effortlessly must be truly powerful. At that moment, Leloucha looks up the sky. Everyone around her does the same, appearing shocked. At that moment, it is revealed that the Elf King has been killed. As a result, all the soldiers lose their hope. Where quickly they drop their weapons and start to flee. Leloucha says that their king had been executed, asking if they still wish to continue resisting. However, the girl, in response, only gives a smile, asking if the rebels still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation. At that moment, an immense light begins to cross the sky. The girl says they would feel the fury of her god. Observing the situation, Leloucha says he was arriving. Then the god appears again, saying they had dared to kill even his physical reincarnation, stating that the dragon shouldn't think they wouldn't kill, just because she was the daughter of the dragon god. The dragon, in turn, is astonished, saying she didn't expect him to visit the human realm personally. Looking to the side, the god becomes surprised, because Leloucha had really come back to life. Drawing his sword, he says he could not spare. Again, his soldiers resume the battle, seemingly more hopeful, because the elf god would act personally. Leloucha thinks he was of a celestial level, and even with the help of the world tree, there was no chance of winning with her current power. Delivering an attack, the elf says the girl had prolonged her welcome for too long, and for that reason, she should die immediately. Right after, Leloucha ends up invoking her barrier. However, the barrier was easily shattered. All of that had not been enough because Dao, in a very stylish manner, intervenes in the situation, asking if the gods of the celestial realm really treated the rules of the human realm like trash. Completely furious, the boy says that breaking the wall of the human realm directly was truly too much. The elf says the protagonist was just trash from the human realm. Therefore, he shouldn't think he could talk to the god just because he blocked one attack. At that moment, Dao falls silent. In a matter of seconds, he appears in front of that god. Then he begins to prepare his attack, telling him to return immediately to the celestial realm. At that moment, that punch hits the elf, who, as a consequence, goes flying. Right after, the scene cuts to the celestial realm and the palace of the elven gods. Something quickly hits that place. Then it is revealed that the elf god had crashed through the wall and was already there, apparently severely injured. His servants, observing the situation, ask if their lord was alright. Irritated, the god wonders if those people from the human realm really dared to treat him that way. For that reason, the gods would exterminate them. Then the scene cuts to the protagonist, apparently relieved, saying that the next realm still existed and pretending to break the wall of the world was very dangerous. Right after, Kin suggests that they should exterminate the city of the elven gods. That's why she was willing to carry out that task. However, the protagonist tells her to just stay quiet. Meanwhile, that other elf, observing the situation, is very surprised. Desperately, she wonders how that was possible, as he had defeated her god with just one blow. For that reason, she wanted to know who that person was. However, Lucia says she had already said that before, because that being was the heavenly Tao itself. At that moment, the girl ends up kneeling, asking if she meant that it was the heavenly Tao. The girl responds that it was exactly that. Hearing what Lucia had said, she falls silent, saying that's how her god had completely failed. Then the scene cuts to the group of dark elves, apparently happy because they had really managed to win that battle. But still the golden elves couldn't believe it. Right after, the other man asked to kill all the golden elves, because it was time to avenge all their comrades. However, Mirror responds that it was enough, because the elf king died and their objective was already achieved, asking why they still wished to massacre them. The man responds that that was exactly how the golden elves treated the dark elves. For that reason, it was right to do the same. But at that moment, his queen intervenes in the situation, asking the boy to calm down. And he shouldn't lose his mind because of hatred, as they had already won. So any other fight would only increase the number of victims. And if he continued to act that way, that individual could not ignore his actions. Looking up, he notices that elf. She apparently begins making an announcement, saying her name was Leloucia and that she was the world tree. For that reason, she had returned after traveling for a long time. Thus, she begins casting a spell. Miri, observing the situation, recognizes that light. As a result of it, the wounds of all the elves begin to heal. Leloucia says that the elf king died and so they should put aside the hatred of the past and move forward together. Furthermore, dragon slayers should not become evil dragons, and all the elves should cooperate and rebuild their home together. Observing the situation, Dao asks why. It seemed like that girl was copying what he had said before. The system says that this world had no patents. Then all the elves end up dropping their weapons. As everyone kneels, the queen says she is willing to lead the dark elves and listen to the words of the elven goddess. The golden elves, observing the situation, end up surprised. However, they seem to accept everything quickly. Kneeling, they say they are willing to listen to the words of the goddesses. Seeing the situation, Lucia gives a happy smile. Sometime later, the protagonist says she did very well, because in that way she truly gained a bit of the stature of God. Leloucia says he speaks in a calm manner, but the mess that man had left behind was still not fully dealt with. The division among the elves had already emerged, and her presence could maintain harmony at a superficial level. Therefore, if the root of the problem was not resolved, the clashes between the different races would only continue. Dao, in turn, is pleased because it was impressive that the girl had already thought so far ahead. The girl says that in that third cycle, the heavenly Dao gave her a chance to restart uniting the elven race. For that reason, this time she couldn't mess things up again. Right after, Dao says there is a way to resolve the whole situation. Happy, Leloucia asks how she should do it. Right after, she grabs the protagonist's arm, saying that as long as he helped her people and freed the social division, she was willing to pay any price. Kin, observing the situation, becomes extremely irritated, asking what the goddess was doing. Dao, in turn, asks her to just step back and listen to what he had to say, mentioning that the elven race was undoubtedly facing two problems. These were the conflicts between the different elf races and the unequal wealth. For that reason, the elven race needed to change in 4 areas: food, clothing, housing, education, and safety. That's why he knew a method to handle all those 4 areas. And that method was creating an elven community. The beautiful young woman asks what an elven community is. The man explains that a community is a public association. In a community, everyone is equal, and all the elves would do the jobs they were best at, and the community would provide food and shelter for everyone. Then he mentions that he had already calculated that before, and the amount of food produced by the elves is more than enough to be self-sufficient. The girl then says that the lower-level elves suffered from a lack of food because the higher-level ones sold their extra grain to humans in exchange for luxury goods. Dao, in turn, says that in the future, everything produced by the elves had to be distributed equally, and that was the only way a community could make sense. The elven goddess mentions that the problems of food and clothing were easier to solve, but building houses required a lot of money. The protagonist says that money they had in abundance, and they see Catherine approaching while escorted by a knight. Dao approaches and says that by keeping the property of countless citizens to herself, now was the time to deal with the former elven nobles. Leloucia says that the properties and belongings of the golden and silver elves would be seized and handed over to the community after inspection. The guards become excited, as they never liked those high-class people, and they begin to confiscate everything. The woman becomes irritated and asks them to stop messing with her things. A man appears behind her, placing a knife to her neck, and says she wasn't expecting that one day she would pay the price for oppressing others. The soldier falls silent after realizing they had been cornered. Dao tells him that all of them had lost their status as high-class individuals and would work alongside elves from other races, then asks if the guard agreed. The man in turn says he agrees. Catherine becomes angry and says that the golden and silver elves had always been destined to be rulers and that the group's victory was temporary. The protagonist asks what evidence she had that they were born to rule, and the elf in turn responds that they were born nobles. The elven goddess becomes irritated with Catherine and binds a plant around her neck using her magic, saying that this was the last time she would let her disrespect pass, and that the differences between elf races were like roots, trunks, branches, and fruits, for they were all different, but part of the same organism. Then she says that if the different elven races want to prove themselves special under her rule, she had a plan. After that, she throws a hoe in front of the elf, saying that she should use her own hands to create something of value and that this was the only way to prove anything. Catherine, in turn, asks if that was some kind of joke, as she was a noble among the elves. But Meir offers no resistance and picks up the hoe. The elf asks if he was really planning to do that kind of manual labor like the Dark Elves, and the knight responds that working alongside the victors was already a gift, and that he never felt they needed elves to be placed in different classes, and that had been a mistake by the Lord God from the beginning. Catherine, after seeing that, calls him a traitor. Dao comments that it seemed like there were reasonable people in the elven tribe, and the goddess, in turn, says she believed most were good like him. Gael says that Lelouch's knave rule would only end the elven tribe, and the girl responds that she appreciated any elf who would monitor her and her rule, and that during this period, Catherine would be able to work alongside others to keep an eye on her. However, the elf laughs and says she will watch the girl's reign crumble before her eyes. Right after, the goddess comments that she wasn't expecting the silver elves to be more stubborn than the golden elves. Dao explains that the silver ones are a race with closer ties to the ancient elven god. After that, Lelouch says there was still the issue of housing, as they could not be built in a short period of time. The protagonist laughs and says the girl was really stupid, and she asks what he was talking about. The boy then, raising his arms, says he will teach her something. After that, the elf activates her powers, making a tree grow its branches, where it ends up forming a house. The goddess impressed and comments that she didn't know that such a thing existed, and says that she truly admires Dao more and more. The boy, in turn, smiles and responds that she was limited by her inflexible way of thinking. Lelouch then says she now knows what she needs to do first. Then, she uses her powers again, creating a massive building, and says that it is a compilation of all the magic she knows so far transformed into a collection of books. The protagonist agrees with that and says that magic was important for the elves, but there should also be basic education. The goddess then announces to everyone that the books in the library are shared property of the community, being free of charge. However, the golden and silver elves shouldn't celebrate too early because they needed to pay for the wrongs they did in the past. They would have to work longer than the other elves until the blood debt was paid through hard work. Mihir, in turn, says he is willing to lead the golden elves to make amends for their mistakes. Lelouch sighs. The protagonist asks if she didn't think the current situation was good. The girl explains that she feared that after the initial passion passed, they would neglect their work and return to the same state. Dao says he has a plan for that, suggesting that the girl create a points system for when the elves complete their tasks, where any remaining value produced would count towards their points, and then establish a points market with clearly labeled prices, allowing the needy to buy what they want. However, these warp points could only be used by individuals and could not be traded to prevent third parties from reselling the items. Out of gratitude, the goddess says she will give him a gift, and the protagonist asks what this gift was. Lelouch responds that it was information about a person from the reverse celestial layer. The next day, the goddess and the protagonist go to the Adventurers Association. Dao observes the whole place and asks if the person from the celestial layer would be there, and the elf responds that there wouldn't be a person of the reverse celestial rank there, and that although she wasn't there, there was still a person who had ties with the Adventurers Association. But before that, she wants the boy to do something for her. Then the girl knocks on a door. The person inside asks her to come in. Lelouch enters and apologizes for showing up suddenly. Lorraine, the head of the Elven Forest Department, asks what business the goddess had with the Adventurers Association. And then the girl places some papers on her desk, saying that she needed to know about the safety of the elves on that list. Lorraine says that it was a list of the elven slaves who had been sold. Lelouch says that the last elf king had dared to sell others for his own benefit, and she couldn't allow such behavior to continue. The department head, in turn, sips her tea and says there was nothing she could do about it. Then the elven goddess takes out her weapon and says she was willing to use her celestial realm weapon as payment. Lorraine is surprised to realize she was willing to use that as payment. After that, the woman says that she would receive news about each person in a month, but she couldn't guarantee that they would still be alive. Lelouch responds that she didn't need to verify if they were alive, but she would need to guarantee the accuracy of the information. After that, the two come to an agreement. Upon leaving the room, Dao asks her if she would now talk about the person from the reverse celestial layer. The goddess then points to a piece of paper posted on the wall and says that the person of the reverse celestial rank was there. On the poster, it was written that traces of ancient relics had been discovered deep within the 10,000 mountains, and that the Adventurers Association would buy any relics found for a high price. Soon after, the pair head to the location. Facing the relic door, the protagonist says that the markings on it were half angel and half demon. Kin says she had seen that before, and comments that the symbols seemed to be that of the god of good and evil, an angel from the west, but using Eastern martial arts techniques. Dao asks how she was as a person during the second cycle. Kin in turn responds that she was nothing remarkable, but she was the second disciple of the great celestial demon mother. The magic sphere comments that the celestial demon mother could be considered someone important in the second cycle, but in front of the Dao, she would be nothing more than an insect. The protagonist in turn says that those cultivators simply didn't understand the cultivation system formulated by the previous celestial Dao, which in turn never limited the cultivators but instead tried to protect them, preventing them from facing the dangerous chaos outside their realm. The Xuan realm was what the previous celestial Dao trusted to let cultivators explore this chaos, but they took it for themselves and used it to aid their cultivation. The protagonist says that the cultivators should not have stopped in this small realm but should have conquered the sea of chaos, creating 3,000 realms. The sphere responds that the boy's way of thinking was very good, but not everyone does as he wishes. Soon after, Dao notices someone arriving mounted on a dragon. It is Enro, who apologizes for being late. The man asks who the protagonist is, and he in turn responds that they shouldn't panic as he was just an adventurer looking for relics. Inside the cave, the protagonist asks a question, saying it was nothing personal. He just wanted to make small talk. Enro responds that he believed it was hard work and a bit of luck, and that it was essential to exercise the body and accumulate knowledge. Dao then asks what cultivation qualification the soldier would like to receive. However, the man doesn't understand the meaning of that question, so the boy decides to give an example. Then he explains that as soon as you are born, you receive attributes like earth, fire, wind, and water in your body, or receive partners, weapons, or pets. Enro asks if that was how animals were domesticated. The protagonist explains that at the age of 6, people awaken a magical weapon or a beast, so they can enhance their strength by cultivating both. And the knight, in turn, comments that he would really like to see something like that, and that perhaps all of them are suitable for fighting, just like dragons. Dao responds that if someone uses this method and awakens different things, there will be a certain difference in power. And after that, a new class division will form, which isn't much different from now. Enro believes that if the methods are correct, everyone has a chance to become powerful, as hard work is always necessary. The protagonist finds it curious that the young man believes the cultivation method is more important than the qualifications. The man asks why the boy was asking that, who in turn responds that the goddess was stronger than him, so he should ask her, as she has a higher reference value. Then he decides to talk to the young man's companion, and assures her he had no malicious intent. The sphere then comments that if he had even the slightest malicious intent, those people would have been dead long ago. Then the girl introduces herself as Yuming and asks if he wants her to do anything. The protagonist asks what she desires as an oriental cultivator in the middle of the 4th rank. The young woman responds that it was spiritual roots, because her master said she had no roots and wouldn't be able to progress beyond the 5th rank in the future, being unable to ascend to the immortal realm. The sphere explains that she was talking about wisdom roots and that for a 4th rank cultivator, she only has 60 years to ascend to the meta-infant stage. The protagonist notes that the cultivator was already at the 4th level, so this meant her efforts had not been awakened. Liang says that the whole point of cultivation is to go against the heavens, and that if she doesn't reach the immortal realm, all of her cultivation will turn to dust. Dao gets irritated and asks who said cultivation was against the heavens, and the young woman responds that it was her master, and that the whole act of cultivation was to take the key of heaven and earth to become stronger, and that's why there are heavenly punishments. The elf questions why they don't just think that only those who pass successfully can be counted as someone of that rank. Liang responds that it made sense, but she still believed that hard work was more important than talent. At the end of the tunnel, they come across a beautiful place. The protagonist activates his power and says he will give the girl some advice, that cultivators need persistence. Then he flies away along with Qin. Liang, after seeing that, wonders who they were. At the top of the cave, the protagonist says that group will have problems soon, and that all cultivators know that hard work is more important than talent, but everyone wants superior talent. So he decides to give everyone the same talent. Qin likes the plan and says that with the same talent, it would make everyone be born with loyal thoughts toward the celestial Dao. The protagonist says you will give all newborns the same amount of talent, but the distribution will be different. Then the door in the cave opens, making people excited, thinking they would ascend. Qin comments that it might be a mystical realm, but the protagonist believes it's because the god of good and evil hasn't died yet. The girl gets irritated upon realizing she had let a being from the celestial layer escape judgment. Dao puts his hand on the girl's shoulder and says it wouldn't be a problem as he would have the chance to speak with her personally. However, the goddess might not be in a good state. otherwise she wouldn't have created such a large commotion like that. Observing the gate, the protagonist notices that the relic seemed to emit an aura of spiritual energy and was absorbing the aura from those cultivators. Kin says that the goddess is probably trying to take the opportunity to revive, and then Dao decides to revive her all at once. All the people feel how the spiritual aura becomes stronger. The boy says that the place where that aura is gathering must be the location of the goddess. Then he says that now the woman can come out. He explains that he decided to revive her so that she would owe him a favor, and that anyway, he needed to act soon. Otherwise, all those cultivators would die. Enro thinks about how his body seemed to be craving and yearning for more spiritual energy. His dragon asks if he is okay and comments that something is very wrong with that place. The man agrees and says that all the spiritual auras suddenly gathered in one place as if this energy wanted to trick them into entering. The people become desperate as the spiritual aura starts to fade away. After that, Enro says that there was definitely something wrong with that relic, and then he decides to flee with his dragon. Liang, seeing that, calls the man a coward and says she didn't expect that the great disturbance in this relic would actually allow blood energy to enter her body and help her ascend to the 5th rank. Then she smiles as that relic offered extraordinary opportunities, so she advances, saying that cultivators seek a long life. Kin warns her master that the energy movement attracted more people, but the boy says to let them come. After that, both decide to enter the cave as well. The people arrive at the location where the goddess is, and they plead for spiritual energy. However, Kin prevents them from approaching, because her master was busy at the moment and didn't want anyone to get close. While healing the goddess, the protagonist tells the girl not to let anyone approach but not to kill anyone. Then the man says that the master of that relic was reviving, and that reviving someone from the dead or creating flesh from bone should involve some kind of celestial treasure, and that it was just one person, so if they went together, someone could definitely pass. Kin, calling them fools, tells them not to take her master's words so lightly. In that instant, those two advance toward Kin. However, the girl easily dodges the attack, delivering a kick to one of them. The other two also try to attack her but end up being defeated with ease. A huge crowd starts advancing against her, but none of it seems to have any effect. Kin, in turn, thinks that controlling her strength was really becoming a problem. The other man says that if they couldn't defeat her, they should just avoid her, because while she was distracted, they could escape. He states that he wouldn't kill anyone, but questions why not try. After all, if they succeeded, they would become rich. Dao, in turn, feels disappointed, asking why they like to intimidate honest people so much. Right after, he snaps his fingers and a magic circle appears beneath those two, and in a matter of seconds, they disappear. The scene then shifts to a location 200 kilometers away from that relic. The group realizes they have been teleported and is very surprised as they were able to perform a teleportation range without any errors. The scene then returns to Dao, who asks if anyone thinking of killing those people was close to reaching them. For that reason, he teleported them away. Dao then asks if his hidden friend wouldn't mind coming out so they could have a conversation. Right after, an unknown girl emerges, saying she was impressed, as she had only stayed there to understand something and wanted to know what kind of person the master of that relic was. Dao responds that she had once been a professional and didn't worry about the strength of her enemies. He hopes that in the future, she continues her cultivation path regardless of the difficulties. The girl thanks him for the advice and says she will take her leave at that moment. Dao thinks that the girl's power had increased significantly, and that after becoming a demon, she was more talented than when she was a cultivator. Approaching the goddess, the prophet says she had been listening for a long time and asks if she thought he didn't know she was already awake. In that instant, the girl opens her eyes and quickly begins to flee. Dao, making a hand gesture, asks if she really thought she could escape right after being revived. Thus, in that instant, the goddess falls to the ground. Kin says that her master hadn't allowed her to leave. The girl is surprised because Kim was calling that being her master. And with a threatening look, a protagonist responds that the master was the heavenly Dao. The girl is shocked, thinking that the aura of that being was very powerful and that therefore she could not fight against him. Since she couldn't do that, she needed to flee quickly. Snapping his fingers again, Dao asks why she liked to flee so much. In a matter of seconds, the girl is chained, and as a result, she cannot move. Kin says that if the girl tries to escape again, he will kill her without hesitation. However, Dao asks not to do that as she had just been revived, and that an introduction would be unnecessary as he just wanted to have a proper conversation with her. The girl responds that she has nothing to discuss. However, Dao says it seems she hadn't understood something because he may have revived her, but that didn't mean she could refuse to answer his questions. Physically, she could refuse to cooperate, but he asks if she thought her mind could resist his enchantment. The girl then asks what Dao wanted to ask. Snapping his fingers again, Dao says she could have cooperated from the start. Then he asks the first question, asking what the Celestial Rebels' plan was. The goddess responds that she didn't know, and Kin says she still wasn't being honest. Dao mentions that there must be a plan she wasn't aware of, and the goddess replies that she never said there was a plan. Moving on to the second question, the protagonist asks if her master was the great celestial demon, and if, by any chance, she had died before. The girl, irritated, says that the protagonist probably knows more about it than she does. Dao states that up to this day, she had a way to revive, and he didn't believe that the great celestial demon mother would die so easily. Right after, he begins to use his magic eye again, saying that with low power, it's normal not to know the plans of the great celestial demon mother along with the core. Therefore, he asks the third question, questioning why she had rebelled against the heavens. And the girl responds that if the heavens were merciless, she had to rebel against them. Hearing what the girl said, the protagonist begins to laugh, asking if she could explain better what she meant by the heavens being merciless. The girl says that the heavens were harsh and treated everyone as inferior beings. In their eyes, there was no place for them among living creatures. Dao says that for a Western angel, she knew a lot about Eastern topics. There was a second timeline in which she had said, because saints are mad and treat people like dogs. He asks what the attitude of a high-level cultivator is towards an ordinary person. Therefore, she should understand more than anyone about that matter, and she should answer if there was any difference in the way she and the celestial Dao did things. The goddess says that it was because he had broken the path of cultivation, so she had no choice but to take resources from others. Dao, disappointed, asks if she really thought he had broken the path of cultivation. It seemed he would have to explain things again. However, the woman responds that it was already too late, because of him, everyone had died. Dao, however, asks her to wait, mentioning that she should have been killed by Qin when she was at the lowest level of the heavenly path, and asks how she knew the other celestial rebels had been killed. The goddess says that's how he was. He would exterminate everyone as soon as possible. Dao then responds that no, letting everyone die once was the plan. Qin, hearing the explanation, looks confused, asking what that meant. The protagonist responds that the celestial Dao was proud, so he didn't bother checking whether the celestial rebels were defeated or whether they were alive or dead. The girl asks if that wasn't a threat to the protagonist. The young man in turn responds that it was incorrect. They couldn't defeat him, but they could devour his power. By killing the incarnations of the heavens, even the celestial Dao could be defeated by them one day. Because of this, all the celestial rebels should be prepared to be revived. Qin says that their plan could not possibly succeed. That's why she would let her subordinate handle everything. However, Dao says he would decide that on his own. Qin says that subordinate had crossed the line. However, the protagonist responds that he would let her go. The goddess questions what his goal was, and the protagonist responds that it was nothing. Since they had finished talking, it was only natural to let her leave. Even so, the goddess still believed he had some hidden plan. Right after, she takes off her coat, saying that he must have done something to the cloak. So he shouldn't think she would fall for his tricks. She wanted to see how the celestial Dao would manage to control her now. Qin, in turn, gets very irritated, asking if she dared to take off the clothes her master had given her. Covering the protagonist's face, Qin says that woman truly had no shame, and for that reason, her master shouldn't look. Dao then asks Qin to step back a bit, because he needed to get back to the topic, saying that if he wanted to leave a mark, even her master wouldn't be able to notice it. The goddess says she doesn't know what he is planning, asserting that she would overthrow the celestial Dao sooner or later. Then she flies off to an unknown location. Qin, irritated, says that woman was too arrogant, asking if he was really going to let her go. However, the boy tells her to just let it be, because it wouldn't cause any harm. Assuming the ancient gods returned to the celestial realm, he wonders how they would interact with the new era Moldova gods. Afterward, that spirit appears, asking if he had already thought about the changes he would make to the cultivation system. Dao responds that he was almost finished. The spirit, in turn, asks for a list of specific configurations. Dao says that those changes wouldn't only affect humans. They would include animals, plants, and even dead beings that might gain consciousness in the future. Therefore, he should set the cultivation qualification for everyone at 100. However, he would assign their talent qualifications randomly to each spiritual root. The system asks why it would be random, and wants to know what would happen if someone ended up with a very poor cultivation qualification by chance. Dao says that if the total qualification was the same, it would mean there were no useless qualifications. And when they turned 12, he would give everyone access to the Celestial Dao Library, and everyone could choose the cultivation method that suited them best. The spirit asks if that wouldn't cause the number of cultivators to explode, and end up plunging the world into chaos again. Dao responds that the majority is the central theme of this world, and in any case, the purpose of giving them qualifications and cultivation methods wasn't for them to work non-stop. What he expected from it was that they could work together to leave that world. Observing all this, Qin says that her master was truly incredible, and the boy says that it was time to return to the elf forest so they could take a look at it. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the elf forest, and people were working together to rebuild the village. Observing all this, the protagonist says that it wasn't bad at all, because the elf community seemed to be progressing well. Then the elf goddess appears, asking what the young man had done, and she wanted to know why the goddess of good and evil had returned from the celestial realm in her complete form. Dao, surprised, says he didn't expect her to find out so quickly. The elf says it was obvious she would know, because as soon as she returned from the celestial realm, the entire western realm became extremely chaotic. In the end, the gods had to work together to drive her out of the western celestial realm. and even the Queen of the Dark Elves was invited to participate in the conference. Dao says that the celestial rebels did everything for justice, asking why she still cared about the city of the gods. The elf responds that what the gods, symbols of faith, need most are followers, and the existing gods never allowed gods to separate from their followers. Dao says that a good god is one who would help their followers solve their problems, and letting them fight could also be considered a good thing, saying that she needed to remember that the newborns of the elven race could also differ from the previous ones. The girl, irritated, asks if he had tampered with the elven race. The protagonist responds that he hadn't, because it was only the elf race, and it concerned the newborns of everyone. For that reason, he changed the cultivation qualification of all future individuals. Now everyone would be able to cultivate. Observing the situation, the elf says she felt that something was going to go wrong, but the protagonist asks her to relax, because the elven race didn't have many newborns, and nothing would happen. Furthermore, only the human race would have the biggest problems. The elf says that if the human Empress Suan finds out about this after being resurrected, she would definitely want to fight against the protagonist. The young man says that even if this weren't happening, she would probably still want to fight him anyway. Kid, in turn, asks not to worry because if that human Empress dared to face Qin personally, she would handle it. At that moment, another elf appears, seemingly desperate about something. The elf then asks what was happening and wants to know what the problem was. Thus, it is revealed that the Holy Synod sent someone to that location. Meanwhile, an unknown man was riding a dragon heading toward the elven city. The dragon, calling the man Joel, asks him to relax because it wasn't the first time they would negotiate with the elves. Joel says he knew that, but the problem was that the aura of the forest elves felt completely different. Soon after, the dragon appears in the village and the impact upon landing is so strong that an explosion occurs. The elves, surprised, wonder what happened. Right after, Joel stands in front of the villagers, asking where the new ruler of the elves was, because he represented the Holy Synod and expected the new government to honor the agreement that the previous Elf King and the Celestial Synod had signed. Observing everything from above, the protagonist says that it was a golden dragon of the dragon god level, so they probably didn't come in peace. Immediately after, the elf goddess seems to begin chanting and then takes hold of the document. Joel, irritated, asks who this woman was who was analyzing all those conditions. As a result, she becomes extremely irritated, asking if he expected her to obey such a disempowering and humiliating treaty. Joel says that if she dared to provoke the Holy Synod in such a way, she should concern herself with being misguided. At that moment, his dragon asked Joel to kneel and apologize for the incident, because Joel was still young and didn't understand things. The man, observing everything, is very surprised. Joel asks why the dragon stopped him. The other elf says he was wondering about that, mentioning that it had been 20,000 years since he had last encountered the daughter of the golden dragon. Then the dragon says that she was the ancient elf goddess, and in terms of importance, she was as incredible as his grandmother, saying that since that girl had aligned herself with the elven tribe, there had been no more problems in that place. Therefore, he would take that fool and leave the elf forest at that moment, and soon after, they begin to leave. However, the girl asks them to wait, questioning if they really thought they could come and go as they pleased. For that reason, she demanded the return of all the elves that the former elf king had sold. Joel says that even if she was the goddess of the elves, it was not something he could agree to. Moreover, they had signed a contract with their former king, and the elves were the property of that saint. Lelucia says that she already knew he would say that. Forming a blue sphere in her hand, she says she had a plan for it. Thus, she begins to observe two people and a sort of door. The scene then cuts to an underground location in the city. A soldier asks what they were doing and if it wasn't his shift. Another man responds, asking why the rush as they were just getting started, questioning if he thought they were as premature as them. Inside the room, the two men were playing with some women and various activities were about to unfold. However, in that instant, someone appears in the place and one of the elves finishes off the man, who, in a matter of seconds, is defeated. Another soldier is surprised, asking if an enemy was attacking. But in a matter of seconds, the other two are also taken down and the hooded elf tells them they will pay for their crimes. The two elf women, observing the other men, ask who they were. Helping the girl, the elf tells her not to worry because the new elf king would show her the way home. Meanwhile, all of this was being transmitted through Lelucia's sphere. Joel then, surprised, says the girl was crazy. For that reason, it was clearly a declaration of war against the saint. However, the girl responds that she never aimed at her, but given all the pressure, there were elves who, without considering their people, were in the Third Sacred Empire. For that reason, they would rescue even the last one of them. Moreover, it was necessary to deal with them. Seeing what the girl was doing, Joel becomes desperate, assuming that he could clearly be killed. However, Lelucia asks him to just fix the houses they had destroyed before leaving. Sometime later, Joel, along with the dragon, was repairing those houses. Ben Dao says that declaring war against all human nations at the same time was a very ambitious game she was playing, but the girl responds that compared to facing the celestial Dao, that was nothing. Dao says that under the elf's command, the community would work very well. For that reason, he would return regularly to check on everything. The girl, in turn, asks if the young man was already leaving. The boy responds yes, affirming that she was responsible for everyone in the Hell tribe, while the celestial Tao was responsible for all living beings in the world. Right after, Lucia approaches the protagonist, apparently wanting to say something, asking if the boy could stay a little longer with her. Irritated, Kin approaches the woman, asking if she was trying to get close to her master. However, Lucia responds that it wasn't what she was thinking. Soon after, the Queen of the Dark Elves appears, saying she had something to report. Lucia, noticing this, asks the girl to speak her mind. The woman says that in the eastern part of the city, they were digging a hot spring with powerful healing properties, so she wanted to know what the elf goddess planned to do with it. The girl in turn says that it was great because she wanted to discuss the hot springs at that moment, saying that it was thanks to Tao that they were able to stabilize the elven tribe. For that reason, she wanted to reward him, asking if he would like to go with her to the hot spring. Observing the situation, the protagonist says that it sounded very good. Thus, he agrees to go with the girl to the spring. Sometime later, the scene cuts to the hot spring. Lucia, talking to the protagonist, asks if he would like her to send someone to massage his back. However, the young man responds no. Soon after, they enter the spring. Kin, approaching the boy, asks to let her clean his body. Throwing the girl out, Tao asks not to allow anyone into the men's bath, especially her. Looking back, Kin notices something that appears to be a plan. Then she picks up the signs. She switches the signs to opposite directions. She says she is entering the women's bath and is not going against her master's orders. In that moment, Kin realizes something. Thinking that this time, without a doubt, was different, she teleports. She thinks she has to deal with it. Soon after, the scene cuts to the sacred church. A man seemed to be kneeling. The girl, beginning to speak, says she heard that the elf goddess had come back to life. The man says it wasn't just that. She also wanted the slaves back and had secretly begun rescuing them. The girl says that she was very restless, and for that reason, they should return everything if that was what she wanted. The man says they had already signed a contract and therefore, all of them were the property of the church. The girl, in turn, asks if the man was questioning her. Kneeling, the man responds that it wasn't like that at all. The girl says that if relics from the past era are found in the human world in the future, they should be brought to the church and sealed. The man says he understands all of that. Thus, they end the discussion. With a threatening look, the girl says they were old friends and for that reason it wouldn't take long for her to come back and discipline them. In that moment, the scene cuts to someone who apparently entered a certain place. However, the aura she had sensed before had already disappeared. She then remembers that she needed to return before her master finished his bath. She quickly starts heading back to the spring. Then the scene cuts back to her. Lucia says that the place was great. Moreover, in that hot summer, they should open the bath to all the elves because she didn't want to be like the old high-class elves. Handing out some towels, the Queen of the Dark Elves says that could wait until the girl had rested. Lucia asks if she would join her. The woman says she would bring everyone later because she had to receive reports on the elf rescue operation first. For that reason, she shouldn't worry. Thanking the girl, the elf responds that she should enjoy herself without ceremony. Right after, she enters the hot spring. However, she still didn't know that the signs had been switched. As a result, she ends up entering the wrong place. Looking around, she says that she was clearly alone, but even so, she felt very embarrassed. Shortly after, she starts observing the area, saying that her children were very clever because they had learned to use magic to build houses. She then sits down to rest. She says that before the protagonist leaves, he should deal with the problems of the elf community. Right after, the voice says that the elf goddess should be more confident. It is then revealed that the protagonist was there, stating that the community was an important experiment and that he believes she can handle it well. The girl, extremely embarrassed, asks why the heavenly Tao was in that place. However, the young man still seemed confused. He then stands up. Tao says it was interesting because he assumed the girl finally couldn't hold back and was throwing herself at him. However, she responds that she would never do such a thing. Lucia asks what he was trying to do because that was the women's bath and he shouldn't be there. Tao then looks confused, asking if Kin hadn't blocked his entry. However, she responds that she hadn't seen that girl. Tao, surprised, assumes that something must have happened with Kin. Meanwhile, Lucia seems a bit embarrassed about something, asking the boy to cover his area because he was still in that place. Tao says he never thought the elf goddess would be so embarrassed to see a man's body. The girl responds that it wasn't that, so he shouldn't come any closer. Approaching the girl, Tao asks her not to worry because he didn't intend to do anything inappropriate. So she was still reluctant. He had a plan. Right after, he snaps his fingers. In a matter of seconds, he assumes a completely different form. He quickly transforms into a woman. Lucia is then surprised because the heavenly Tao was in a female form. The boy says that the heavenly Tao never had a concept of gender and was showing that because it was nothing more than a form. Hearing the protagonist's explanation, the girl is surprised. Shortly after, she starts vomiting out of disgust. Tao asks if she's okay. However, Lucia asks him not to come closer because that look of his reminded her of some unpleasant things from the past. In that moment, the spirit appears, saying that his current form probably reminded her of the heavenly Tao from the second cycle. Tao asks if she would prefer he return to his previous form, and Lucia says it's not necessary. so he should let her get used to it. After all, things were completely different now. Hearing what the girl said, the protagonist remains silent. Then he smiles, saying that if that was the case, he would leave the girl alone and enjoy himself. He then begins to take a bath as well. Dao says that the elven community would have to face many challenges in the future, and it would be better to handle the entire race together. Volusia says she understands the situation and for that reason would put all her effort into it. It didn't matter what happened before because she had to thank him for everything he had done for her race. However, the young man responds that he did all that merely for experimental purposes. The elf says that for the elven race, it was the beginning of a new life, and to be honest, she didn't know how to express her gratitude. But the boy responds that he has an idea for that. He starts looking at the girl with a different expression. Embarrassed, the girl asks if he really wanted her to do that because, in fact, it was her first time. Dao asks if she saw a third person in that place, and for that reason, should come closer because he wanted to feel comfortable. Approaching the protagonist, Volusia responds that she would begin. She starts massaging the protagonist, asking if the pressure was just right. In that instant, someone else enters the hot spring. It is revealed to be Kin, who says she also wants to join. She ends up witnessing the scene of Volusia with the boy. Observing everything, she falls silent, apparently surprised by something, because her master was no longer visible in that place, but in reality, she didn't know that the two were already invisible. Dao asked the girl to stay quiet as they couldn't let Kin know that she was bathing with the protagonist. Volusia imagines a scenario where the world could even be destroyed if Kin discovered the truth. Dao says it seems she already understood the situation. Soon after, Kin enters the hot spring, feeling very frustrated because it seemed her master had already left. Blaming the goddess of light, she says she had orchestrated everything so she couldn't bathe with her master. Dao in turn says that it was always her desire to do so, and for that reason, they should leave as soon as possible. Soon after, they begin to leave. However, Volusia bumps into something. Surprised, the girl asks who is there. In that instant, she grabs the girl. She then realizes it's the elf. She asks why she was there, thinking she was trying to retrieve her things. Soon after, Dao asks the girl to let go of Volusia because it was all a misunderstanding. And all of it happened because the girl had switched the gender signs. Surprised, Kin asks why the protagonist was in that form. Dao in turn responds that there was really no need to maintain that female form at that moment. He then snaps his fingers, returning to his normal form. Kin, desperate, says the girl shouldn't look at her master's body. Meanwhile, the group of elves was at the back of the hot spring. They then entered to greet their goddess. However, they end up encountering that extremely awkward scene, where they quickly begin to leave, apologizing for disturbing them. Shortly after, the scene cuts to the royal castle. Kin is very sad. She says her image has been completely destroyed. Frustrated, Kin says that even though she had seen her master's body, she was still not satisfied. Dao then says that it wouldn't be difficult to make them forget about the incident. However, Luther says that it's fine and that he shouldn't do anything to them. At that moment, the Queen of the Dark Elves appears, asking if she could interrupt for a moment. She says she had received the latest news from the perimeter of the elf forest. It was said that the army of the Third Empire had entered the border. The scene then cuts to several soldiers heading toward a specific location. Their captain says they are going to the elven territory and should be cautious. Another man says that attacking the elf territory seemed like a dream. He comments that if he could capture an elf woman as his slave, it would be extremely gratifying. Meanwhile, an older man observes Ludo in silence. He wonders what those young people see in war. The other man asks if he isn't a bit anxious, given they have an imperial army of 30,000 strong men. For that reason, the elves wouldn't stand a chance. The man responds that if he underestimates the war, it will definitely have a huge impact on him. He then asks why the old man is so apprehensive. The man replies that it was an order. Right after, the wind starts to pick up. The general says that something probably happened, and they should take their positions. Thus, the soldiers form their defensive stance. One of them seems to have noticed something. Shortly after, he begins looking up at the sky. A giant monster was surrounding them. Above them, the elf goddess was present, asking them to leave her lands immediately. The general says they thought an army would be coming to greet them. He asks if the girl was from the elf tribe. The soldiers, looking at the girl, comment that she wasn't bad at all. For that reason, they wanted to capture her and make her their slave. Volusia warns them again, asking everyone to leave her territory. However, the general asks if she really thought just a warning would stop them. After doing all that, they would take everything from her land and reclaim what they had lost. Shortly after, a celestial figure appears from the bushes, saying he had a suggestion. They should leave immediately with their army, as that would allow them to keep their lives. The general, in turn, questions if the boy was threatening them. He responds that he wasn't. He was merely giving a polite suggestion. Ignoring the boy's advice, the general orders his troops to advance because he wanted to see how good they were. Udurna then commands all of his soldiers to capture the elves. As a result, they begin moving toward the monster. Dao in turn says that it seemed neither side intended to talk. The spirit asks which side he would like to help, and the protagonist responds that he had already given a hint. So, if they continued the fight, it would have nothing to do with him. In that moment, Volusia draws her divine weapon. She begins casting a spell. In that instant, a giant eye appears. several trees start coming to life. The soldiers are very surprised by what they are witnessing. The roots of those trees begin invading their formation. As a result, they manage to defeat some of the soldiers. Meanwhile, one of the soldiers urges everyone to flee, but in a matter of seconds, the man is taken down. The general commands them to stay in formation and analyze their enemy so they could survive. Moreover, those who tried to flee would be immediately killed. For that reason, everyone was to form a circular formation and hold the tree monsters within. The mages were to prepare their fire magic and clear the monsters in the center of the formation. Thus, they do as their general commanded, launching their attacks at the trees. Meanwhile, Tao observes alongside the spirit. He says that the reason humanity is so powerful is due to the cooperation humans have with each other. Tao agrees, saying that was true as humans thought of every possible way to increase their power. However, it was a shame that the battle had already been decided long ago. Returning to the battle, the soldiers are very surprised because the trees had somehow come back to life. Meanwhile, the elf goddess is observing everything from above. And in that instant, the general appears, saying he has to get rid of her. The girl then begins speaking in a strange language. The man is confused because he finds himself trapped in a matter of seconds. He asserts that no one on Earth could have that kind of power, wondering who the girl was. The elf responds that her name isn't important. She then begins invoking a gigantic magic circle, launching an incredible attack at the man, who is defeated in seconds. While the general is trapped, he asks who Lucia is, and she responds that she is the goddess of the elves. The scene then cuts to the protagonist's soldiers taking spirits to a specific location. Tao, observing everything, says that the underworld was still functioning with relative success. But it was a pity that the chaos in the human world was 100 times greater than in the underworld. The spirit asks what he plans to do, and the boy responds that he needs to find the representative of the human world and have a good conversation with him. And the name of that person was the human emperor named Xuan. The scene then cuts to a monster heading toward a village. The serpent says that the celestial spiritual energy felt different, because even its cultivation, which had been stagnant for years, had been released. So when it devours those people, it would be able to transform into a true dragon. It then begins advancing toward the people, who desperately start running. In that moment, a girl appears at the scene. She launches an attack with her swords toward the serpent, which is then easily defeated. As a result, she saves everyone in the village. The villagers begin to praise her, to which she responds that there was no need to thank her, because it was all her duty. It is then revealed that the girl was Stuan. Shortly after, she looks up. Sensing that strange spiritual energy, she wonders what exactly the heavenly Tao was trying to do. At that moment, the scene cuts to the protagonist. He says it's a pity that he still hasn't been able to find the being called Xuan. The spirit responds that celestial rebels of king and reverse ranking are highly specialized, because even if Emperor Xuan were right in front of him, he might not recognize him. In fact, he could become the human emperor and establish a community that would allow him to unite all of humanity, as they had tried before but failed. Tao responds that the community system was not yet mature, and a full-scale launch would be nothing more than a complete failure. For that reason, there was no one-size-fits-all solution, but the spirit replies that he was thinking things through more and more deeply. Soon after, the elf appears, saying she had taken care of things on her end. Tao, in turn, is surprised because the girl had resolved the situation very cleanly. Leloucia says that since they decided to invade, they should have been prepared to die. The protagonist remarks that the girl making the first strike to avoid future conflict was an excellent decision, and for that reason, the underworld would be busy. In that moment, the young man notices something, observing that some souls were heading toward a black hole. Surprised, he wonders why there were still some souls that couldn't enter the underworld, supposing it could be a problem with reincarnation again. In that instant, a girl emerges from the portal, calling the protagonist Master. It is revealed that the girl from before was present in that place. Tao, in turn, asks why she is there. She responds that there was a problem with reincarnation, because her subordinate couldn't make the decision on her own. Observing the situation, the protagonist says he could already guess the reason, saying it must have something to do with those spirits that couldn't enter the cycle of reincarnation. Yumain confirms that it's true because there was an inverse celestial ranked god in the realm fighting for the souls of the dead. Ken and Lucia are surprised, wondering if there were really people in the reverse celestial layer still alive in the third cycle. Tao then asks who the individual was. Yumain responds that specifically, it was the god of death. Noticing Lucia's surprise, the protagonist asks if he was someone she knew. The girl replies that she wasn't familiar with him, but she had heard that he takes 30% of the souls of the dead, regardless of their belief system. The number isn't particularly large, but most gods let the death gods escape with those souls. Tao, in turn, says that the figure was indeed skilled at what he does, but it was a shame because the protagonist desired all those souls. Soon after, Ken asks if the girl intends to kill him. She says she is willing to do so because of her subordinate's decision. However, Huming tells her to forget about it. She then draws her bow, saying that Kin is no match for the reverse celestial ranked god of death. For that reason, she should let her handle it alone. However, the protagonist responds that it isn't necessary. A god at the celestial level wasn't in the old heavens for his path. Besides, all this had made Tao very curious. At that moment, he begins to examine the portal again. He seems to have done something different with it. Thus, he prevents the girls from following him. Shortly after, the scene cuts to the portal in a completely different place. Looking around, they feel very frustrated because the place is extremely dark. In that instant, they hear a voice moaning, and Dao says it seems that the god of death has prepared a welcoming ceremony for them. In that instant, several spirits start emerging from the ground, staring intently at the protagonist group. The two girls immediately form their defensive positions to protect their master. In that moment, the spirits start advancing toward them, and the two girls begin to defeat all the spirits. Observing the situation, Yuming remains extremely focused, saying her target is in sight. She then fires an arrow from her bow, which as a result, defeats several spirits. Dao, observing the situation, says that those ghosts still need to return to the cycle of reincarnation. For that reason, it's best not to kill them all. Looking back, the young man notices something, and an extremely different spirit is approaching the protagonist. In that instant, the young man makes a hand gesture, and in a matter of seconds, the monster is defeated. Dao begins to approach the spirit, noticing that several other spirits were accompanying it. The entire area seemed to be merging, forming a sort of river. Yumeng, observing, suggests that it might be a lake. However, the protagonist responds that it wasn't a lake because all of this was spiritual energy sealing the ghosts. He acknowledges that the god of death was more powerful than he had imagined. Qin asks if the boy intended to defeat the god of death. However, the protagonist asks her to wait because they would see how things unfolded. After finding the god of death, they would talk to him. Shortly after, the boy notices something, commenting that it seemed like the entity wasn't feeling any pain even while hiding in that pool. He then observes a different kind of spirit. Dao approaches the being, who then asks if he was the heavenly Dao. The protagonist, surprised, asks if they had met before. The spirit responds that they hadn't and quickly tries to leave the area. Dao, surprised, asks why they didn't want to have a normal conversation. If that were the case, he would have to break through their defenses first. He easily manages to dispel part of the lake, revealing the entity again. It is shown to be a girl who appears to have no clothes. Qin, surprised, supposes that she might actually be the goddess of death. However, she is still shocked because the girl looks exactly like Yuming. The girl responds that she wasn't 100% the same because, in fact, she got a much better body. Dao remarks that it made sense as she was likely the soul of the previous girl. However, she replies that her name was different. In that moment, Dao snaps his fingers. He hands some clothes to the girl. The girl then introduces herself, saying her name is Yu, and that she is the matriarch of the Yuming clan. Moreover, she is the last member. In the beginning, her clan was almost wiped out because the concentration of spiritual energy had diminished. To create an opportunity for the world, her soul fragmented. Observing the situation, the protagonist says that she had failed. The girl confirms that, explaining that chaotic energy devoured her. When she returned, the world had completely changed. It had entered an era of gods and goddesses. Her body had become one of the incarnations of the heavenly Dao. Saying that the heavenly Dao would make difficult things for her, she asks why he didn't follow the path of the ancient ones to ascend to the heavens. The boy responds that, naturally, Dao says that the main problem now is where she belongs. Therefore, he repaired the cycle of reincarnation, and those souls should be in that cycle, constantly resetting. The girl, in turn, says that he is the heavenly Dao, and for that reason, he gives the orders. The protagonist then asks if she would like to serve in the underworld. She responds that even though he is the heavenly Dao, she is not obligated to follow his orders. Qin, irritated, asks why the girl still dares to refuse. Invoking a sphere in his hand, the protagonist says that the job naturally comes with compensation. He asks if she thinks what he is offering as compensation is very good. Seeing it, the girl appears to recognize the sphere. She supposes that the entire Yuming clan was within it. Even so, she can't believe it, asking how the boy managed to do that. The protagonist, in turn, asks her not to be surprised as there was nothing in the universe that the heavenly Dao couldn't accomplish. Yu asks why the boy is helping. Dao says it's merely a transaction. He would revive the members of her clan, and in return, they would help maintain order in the underworld. For that reason, it was a fair deal. The girl says she doesn't understand because the boy could easily kill her and create a new manifestation of the heavenly Dao. She asks why he bothers with such a negotiation. Dao expresses disappointment, saying that in their eyes, he was like a monster. The protagonist then explains that the heavenly Dao treats all living creatures in the best way possible. Therefore, he wouldn't force anyone. He asks if she is willing to accept the deal. Hearing the protagonist's offer, the girl remains silent. Nevertheless, she eventually agrees to the proposal. The boy says it will be a pleasure working with her. Yuming then speaks, saying that now that she has chosen to enter the underworld, she should return all the souls she had collected. In that instant, the girl begins to do as requested, and all the souls appeared to be released. They accumulate in the palm of her hand. She states that these are all the souls she had collected previously. For that reason, she would hand them over to the protagonist. Observing this, Yuming says that something doesn't seem right, because although the number of souls isn't large, the souls of the soldiers from the Saint and the Third Empire who had just been killed are missing. She asks if the girl is possibly trying to hide some of the souls. The girl responds that she isn't hiding anything, as those souls were never absorbed by her in the first place. All those soldiers were sacred citizens of the Third Empire and believe in the goddess of light, so their souls would have been taken by the goddess of light after their deaths. Kim then says she also has information to report. She mentions that when the boy was bathing in the hot springs, she sensed the aura of the goddess of light, so that individual had probably descended to the immortal realm. She affirms that all of this was the fault of that woman who couldn't stay away from her master. Observing the situation, the protagonist says it seems they will have to deal with this. Hin asks if he wants them to go together to the Third Sacred Empire. However, Dao responds that no, there's no need for her to follow this time, because taking her could only cause trouble, and besides, the underworld needs labor, so she should help Yu Ming complete the work before meeting him. He states that he will leave the order of the underworld to the two of them, so he expects that when he returns, he will see the constructions they have made. As the protagonist leaves, Yu Ming says she has something to tell him. She explains that the human empress named Swan, along with the ghost empress, were not dead, and that both had come to the end. Dao, in turn, is surprised as the old heavenly Dao tormented so many people that he ended up becoming extremely lonely. As he begins to leave, he thanks her for the information, saying that at some point he will meet them. Shortly after, the other girl asks if she will be able to work with her, and Yu Ming responds that since it was the master's order, they would have to work together. In that moment, Qin appears between the two, saying that they should stop wasting time because they need to take advantage of this place, so they can finish the work quickly and go meet the master. The scene then cuts to the Third Sacred Empire in the city of Bright Sun. Meanwhile, the protagonist is flipping a coin into the air. He then catches it again. He says that a man named Charles Xi is the emperor of that empire, and for that reason, he seems quite impressive. The spirit mentions that human emperors provide believers to the gods, and the gods guarantee the power of the emperors. It's a method they found for power to coexist after the second cycle. At that moment, a little boy bumps into the protagonist, quickly apologizing. The spirit says that the boy is a thief, and the protagonist, surprised, notes that his movements are quick, indicating that he is an experienced criminal. But even so, it's a pity that he chose the wrong target. Soon after, the boy approaches one of the stalls, saying he wants to buy a watermelon. He asks if the vendor knows the boy, to which the vendor responds affirmatively, because he is a well-known thief in that area who lives in the poor part of the city's eastern zone. Furthermore, he has a sister who engages in shady business alongside him. Dao says that since he knew he was a thief, he asks if he isn't afraid of being robbed. The man says that even the most inferior people have their own rules, and an aristocrat like him wouldn't understand. And if he intended to find the child to seek revenge, he should abandon the idea because he's heard that the boy's sister has dealings with demons. Hearing the man's explanation, the protagonist remains silent. Handing over several bags of coins, he thanks the vendor for the information. He instructs the man to deliver the rest to the boy named Peter and tell him that people should walk the right path. The spirit in turn asks where the boy wishes to go, and he responds that he wants to go to the poor area in the city's eastern zone. The scene then cuts to another location where a mysterious girl says that it is very beautiful. For that reason, there's no need to rush out, because he is really extremely handsome. It is then revealed that several girls are surrounding the protagonist. He then says that it's a pleasant place for doing business with demons. Meanwhile, a group of boys appears to be trying to strike a deal with him. Dao then takes out a bag of money. He tosses it into the air, and the girls notice that all of them are gold coins. The girls quickly begin to gather all the coins. Meanwhile, an elderly woman observes everything attentively. Dao notices her. He asks if that amount of money would be enough for a private room, and the woman responds affirmatively. Entering the woman's inn, she asks him to follow her. Shortly after, the scene cuts to the protagonist inside the room. Two extremely beautiful girls are watching him. The spirit, surprised, comments that he never thought the day would come when the heavenly Dao would visit a brothel. Soon after, more girls appear, and the woman asks them to greet the young master. The woman then asks if Dao liked any particular girl, or if he perhaps wished to have them all. Dao in turn begins to observe them all. He quickly activates his magic eye. He observes the hearts of the girls, noticing that one of them is different. Smiling at this discovery, he says they can take the money and leave, because, in truth, he would be satisfied with just the one in front of him. The girl, who appears to be blind, is surprised and asks if he truly wants her. The woman, equally surprised, comments that he has very unique tastes and asks if she should send the girl to attend to him after helping her get dressed. Dao responds that it's fine. The spirit remarks that he hopes the protagonist has time to enjoy the specialty of the Third Sacred Empire. The young man replies that he wants no part of this corrupt empire because these girls are willing to sell everything for a bit of money. However, for the empire's elite, that money could be nothing more than the price of a breakfast. The spirit states that class division is inevitable in any society, and many things are determined at birth. But Dao responds that the reason he changed the spiritual concentration was due to the world's rules, which were meant to allow them to fill that gap through their own efforts. Soon after, the blind girl reappears, asking how she can help the protagonist. Dao hands her some gold coins, saying that it's for her. The girl, surprised, responds that it's too much for her. However, Dao tells her not to worry as it's payment for talking to him. He mentions that he heard Peter is her younger brother. The girl apologizes, saying that if she caused any trouble, she would make amends. However, the boy responds that it's not about that, as he had heard some stall owners talking about her. They mentioned that her eyes had been taken by demons. But he doesn't believe that and asks if he can take a look. The spirit comments that he could obviously see through the blindfold. However, Dao asks him to stay quiet. Removing her blindfold, the girl says she had already paid her dues, so there's nothing inconvenient for her. Observing her, the protagonist is surprised because her condition appears much worse than he expected. He approaches the girl and notices a light inside her eye. In that moment, the light leaves the house, heading directly toward a church. Meanwhile, a woman appears to be praying, and that energy travels to the other side of her eye. Dao remarks that he has already traced the person, noting that organ trafficking is truly interesting. The spirit says that to prevent such situations, the inner heavenly Dao made most human organs exclusive to the person. The protagonist acknowledges this but points out that this is a world of magic and deities. He asks if the girl wants to know where her eyes are. However, she responds that she doesn't want to know. She just wants to survive alongside her brother. The protagonist places his hand on her head, telling her not to worry, as he will recover her eyes. He then leaves the lodging. The girl in turn collapses to the ground, crying, asking the gods to protect her family from more tragedies. Meanwhile, the protagonist observes everything, and in that moment, the scene cuts to the church of the Third Sacred Empire. A man there appears distraught, confessing his sins to the woman. However, she tells him not to worry, because everyone on this planet has sinned, and as long as he buys the atonement coupon, the gods will forgive his sins. The scene then cuts to nighttime. The man says that this was the last money his family had left, so he prays for the goddess of light to protect them. The nun assures him that everything will be fine because the goddess of light will save her devoted followers. The next person in line is called. Meanwhile, the protagonist silently observes everything. The spirit comments that the church seems to be selling a way to communicate with God. Dao says he refuses to believe that the goddess of light could truly hear the voices of those people. For that reason, he needs to see it for himself. Meanwhile, the nun continues handing out some coupons to the other citizens, appearing very pleased with the amount of money she's receiving. Soon after, an unknown person is seen begging to get through. It's the protagonist in a different outfit, claiming he urgently needs the great goddess of light. The nun says that she listens to the words of each of her followers, so he should confess all his sins. The protagonist says that he and his sister are miserable people living in the poor zones and that the days have been passing by. However, one day she suddenly lost her eyes, which caused her to lose her job, and their family fell into poverty. For this reason, he wants to know why so much misfortune has befallen them. The nun says that as long as he is willing to sincerely repent, there is no hardship that cannot be overcome. Therefore, the goddess of light will help. The nun seems very nervous. She wonders why the words of this child seem to carry a deeper meaning. She tells him that if he buys a coupon, the goddess of light and his sister can surely be saved. Dao then appears very happy, asking if that's really true. The nun confirms that it is, but she adds if he wants things to improve faster, he must buy more coupons. Dao then seems to have a plan in mind. He pulls out a huge bag of money. He asks if that would be enough for his sister to be immediately saved by the goddess of light. The nun is completely overwhelmed upon seeing the enormous amount of money. She says that it is certainly enough. The protagonist states that with that amount, he wants to speak personally with the goddess of light. He also wants to take the opportunity to ask where his older sister's eyes are. The girl seems extremely desperate at this point. She quickly calls her guards. She instructs them to arrest this person. Dao says there seems to be a misunderstanding. He had bought many coupons just to see the goddess of light and speak with her. However, that couldn't be true unless she simply had no way of communicating with the goddess. The nun, desperate, pleads for him to stop talking. The guards should grab him immediately. As he dodges their attacks, the protagonist asks if they've seen it. The priestess simply cannot communicate with the goddess of light. For that reason, all the coupons in their hands are nothing but useless pieces of paper. In that instant, Dao snaps his fingers. The other soldiers are completely confused. They wonder why they can no longer move. Approaching the guards, Dao says he will borrow their weapons. He asks if everyone clearly saw what happened. That church is a despicable organization profiting from their faith. If they truly want their fate to change, they must rely on their own hands. The nun angrily asks if the believers wish to blaspheme against the goddess of light. Quickly, the group kneels. They say they have done nothing wrong and beg the goddess for forgiveness. The girl feels reassured. She says that this is the power of devotion, and for that reason, he should not attempt to break their faith. Dao forms a blue light on his fingers. He quickly strikes, hitting the statue from earlier. It splits in half. The nun is completely shocked, thinking they are finished. The villagers are enraged. They ask if he dares to desecrate the statue of the great goddess of light. For this, he deserves to die. Dao asks them to calm down. He asks if that really looks like the statue of a god. It is then revealed that inside the statue is an incredible amount of gold coins. Dao says that the faith offerings they all gave to the goddess of light seem to have been stored in that church. As a result, all the villagers are furious. They feel that something has been wrong for a long time. A massive commotion breaks out. Everyone demands their money back. The nun pleads for everyone to calm down, saying there is still a way to explain. The spirit then asks if this chaotic scene is what he wanted to see. Dao responds that if people are being deceived, there must always be someone to resist. He hopes that such resistance will be carried out independently. Soon after, another unknown person appears, asking everyone to stop. She asks if they wish to witness a divine miracle. For that reason, they must be ready to pay the price. In that instant, she raises her staff. She prays for the goddess of light to respond to her call. Shortly after, an unfamiliar figure appears in the area. The villagers are completely shocked. This is likely the goddess of light. They quickly kneel, apologizing for their rudeness. They beg for forgiveness for their sins. The figure then asks for the reason behind the summoning. The Pope states that these foolish rebels have betrayed their faith in her and even attacked members of the clergy. Furthermore, he points out that the person behind her is the one who orchestrated the plan. The figure then questions the protagonist, asking why he abandoned his faith. Dao responds that faith provides belief and therefore should also offer something in return. Only in this way can it be called a beneficial relationship. However, the church at the moment is in chaos, full of corruption and rampant bribery. Additionally, they are involved in organ trafficking and deceit. Many other terrible things are happening. He asks if this is how she tolerates the actions of her subordinates as the goddess worshipped by the people. The Pope becomes furious, asking who gave him the audacity to be so disrespectful to the goddess of light. He states that they will still prove their loyalty to the goddess, instructing the villagers to kill the protagonist. Quickly, they draw their weapons. They say it is all to atone for their sins, and for that reason, they apologize for what they must do. The spirit remarks that it seems his good intentions were not understood by anyone. The protagonist explains that this is why he dislikes monotheistic religions, as they are too extreme in their thinking. He argues that failing to respond to their followers for a long time could cause their faith to collapse. Undoubtedly, the religion of the goddess of light is not fit for expansion. The villagers, enraged, declare that they will not allow him to continue slandering the goddess of light. Just then, the statue of the goddess splits in half. The other man, surprised, asks what happened. In that moment, Qin appears, asking how he dared attack her master from behind while she was away. For that reason, it is unforgivable. Dao, in turn, says that he was never in any danger. Recognizing the figure, Qin deduces that it might be the goddess of light. She asserts that she sensed her presence earlier, but unfortunately, she had escaped. Charging at her, she says she wants to see if the goddess will manage to escape again this time. Qin swiftly throws a punch in the area. However, the figure barely manages to dodge. Even so, it doesn't help as Qin quickly lands a kick. Everyone around is shocked by what happened. The protagonist is disappointed that she resorted to violence again. The spirit comments that using that method helps destroy their faith more effectively. However, the protagonist replies that he doesn't want to destroy their faith, he just wants their goddess to do something positive. Shortly after, Qin asks the goddess of light to get up. Smiling, she tells Dao that she successfully caught the woman. Recognizing the protagonist, the goddess of light asks if he is the heavenly Dao. Stating that she never took part in any revolutionary action, she asks why he is targeting her. However, Dao responds that he isn't. He hopes that she could be more humble and care a little more for her followers. They are willing to abandon everything for their faith, but in return, they receive only poverty and despair. As their goddess, she receives their faith while doing practically nothing. It doesn't sound very convincing. The goddess then asks if the boy came there just to say that. Noticing this, Qin tells her to show more respect to her master. Dao then asks if he can make a deal with her. He says he could allow her to continue preaching. For that reason, he would help expand her influence. The goddess asks what that would cost her. Dao responds that it would mean listening more attentively to the voices of her followers. Aims to reinforce this, controlling the church alongside the elimination of hypocrites. The goddess, of surprise, asks if that's really all, and the protagonist confirms that it is. The spirit comments that he thought he was more against religion, and Dao responds that it's unrealistic to ask people to abandon all their beliefs. Continuing, Dao says that she would have to expand her religion under his supervision, and become a good religion that serves the people. Dao asks if she will accept, and the goddess responds that she cannot refuse the offer. The protagonist says he's glad she's willing to cooperate, but it's best to keep it between them and not let anyone find out. He quickly snaps his fingers. The people around them fall unconscious. The Pope, surprised, asks if everyone has fallen asleep. Approaching the two, Dao says that they will also have to pay for what they've done. In the blink of an eye, the situation appears resolved. A while later, a flower lies on the ground, and it seems something has happened to her eyes. The protagonist explains that those eyes were never hers. Dao says these are the kinds of good deeds the members of her church have been doing, as they've been buying and selling transplanted organs. The goddess responds that those are choices her followers have made voluntarily, and as she sees it, it's a way for them to have faith in her. Dao retorts that this transgression was committed by those under her command and asks if she still prevents those victims from reflecting on their mistake. He states that she is even more arrogant than the heavenly Dao itself. The reason her religion is in decline is that someone like her only cares about the number of followers, not the needs they face. And since she chose to work with the protagonist, a reform is inevitable. Even so, she shouldn't worry because the reformed religion of the goddess of light will shine even brighter than before. However, there's something she must do first. He asks if she shouldn't return all the souls she had taken to the underworld. The scene then cuts to another location. The brother of the girl from earlier says he's home. He also mentions that he received a gold coin which will last them for a long time. Hugging the boy, the girl says that what matters is that he's safe, as a customer came close to her that day because of him. The boy, in turn, asks what his sister is talking about. He quickly notices that her eyes are glowing. He removes her blindfold. With tears streaming down her face, she realizes that her eyes have returned. She can see her brother clearly again. The girl is overjoyed, thanking the goddess of light. Meanwhile, the protagonist, alongside the goddess, is observing the situation. Dao asks if she saw that because such a small favor could satisfy her followers. Serving them properly is what a god should do. He then mentions they should head to the underworld, as there are still things to be done. The scene cuts to the underworld, where the protagonist group is guiding the souls to the cycle of reincarnation. Additionally, all the dead must be judged in the underworld. Yuming is presiding over the judgment. She asks who is next and wants to know what crime they committed. The Pope and the nun appear, pleading to be released, claiming they were unjustly accused. Even if they were wrong, they should be judged by the goddess of light herself. Yuming declares that all souls departing from that world must enter the underworld created by the heavenly Tao. For that reason, no one can disobey. She picks up a paper and reads all the crimes they committed. She asks if they have any explanations, and the Pope insists they never did any of those things. Sensing the gravity of the situation, the girl is ready to give her punishment. She orders them to be placed in a vat of hot oil and fried 100 times first. The other guards take the two away. Another girl asks why she gave the verdict instead of her. The other responds that the heavenly Tao asked for her help. A disagreement breaks out between the two. They argue about everything that had happened before. In that moment, the protagonist appears, commenting that the two seem to be getting along well. Quickly, the two girls grab the protagonist. They ask if he's there to see the results of their governance. However, Yuming claims that she's the one in charge. The goddess of light, observing the situation, asks if he is that kind of heavenly Tao, and the protagonist replies that it's all a misunderstanding. He asks them to remain calm, as he knows they both did an excellent job in the underworld. But there are serious matters to address at that moment. He asks if it's time for the goddess of light to return the souls in her possession to the underworld. In that instant, the goddess of light summons a sort of mirror. Several souls begin to emerge from it. She asks if he is satisfied, and Dao says this is how cooperation should be. He then asks if there's a place to rest, as he would like to take this time to have a proper conversation with the goddess of light about reforming her religion. Hearing this, the servants fall silent. Kitten says that the workers' dormitories in the underworld have just been completed and offers to guide him. Observing the situation, another girl comments that it seems her master wishes to have a private conversation with the goddess of light. In that instant, she asks them to wait a moment. She suggests they take a tour of the underworld first. The goddess of light, confused, wonders what is happening. A while later, Dao and Qin are walking and she shows him the workers' dormitory. Dao, puzzled, asks if it isn't a bit too luxurious for a dormitory. Qin explains that these are the underworld workers' quarters and they haven't received any special treatment. Dao understands and asks her to proceed further. Eventually, they reach a room and Qin says this is the place prepared especially for him. Dao remains silent, examining the room. He asks if she's saying that everyone in the underworld lives in luxurious rooms like this, but Qin clarifies that his case is special. Dao sighs, commenting that he doesn't visit the lower world frequently, and yet he's returning to such a room, making it a complete waste of resources. The girl says it was all Yuming's doing, and she made the decisions on her own. She suggests he discipline them to calm his servants, advising him to rest well. She offers to give him a massage to help him relax, suggesting they start with his mouth. As she approaches his face, Dao stops her. He throws her out of the room. The spirit comments that she really wanted to show loyalty. Dao responds that he doesn't need her to demonstrate it that way. He mentions that the underworld seems to be functioning correctly and the basic work is effective. Nevertheless, he should take the opportunity to relax. He decides to take a bath. Looking to the side, he notices something. He tells Qin that she can leave first as he doesn't need anyone. As the girl is about to open the door, the goddess of light appears, saying Dao asked her to come. The two stand in awkward silence. Embarrassed, she apologizes, saying she'll return later. At that moment, she bumps into Yuming. Yuming asks who authorized her to leave and tells her to return to await the master. The goddess of light tries to explain, but the two girls insist on no excuses, telling her to enter immediately. Dao remarks that sometimes he doesn't know what they're doing, asking if there's something she wants to say. The goddess of light offers to help massage his back. Dao declines but asks her to sit down as they need to talk. He explains that it's the same topic as before. She must expand her faith in the human realm, and he can assist with that. At the same time, she must fulfill her duties and help each follower to the best of her abilities. The goddess of light asks if he plans to use her followers to spread his word. Dao responds that she can see it that way, but he believes it aligns with the knowledge of common people. Given the world's current state, it's impossible for everyone to receive education. So, leaving her religion and being her master is the natural path. He suggests she should do something different instead of allowing other religions to spread uncontrollably. He asks why she doesn't seek a trustworthy god to work alongside. He then notices something different and asks if she chose that outfit. Embarrassed, she denies it, saying it was the work of her foolish servants. Dao comments that it seems to have been them again. But despite everything, the goddess looks great in those clothes. He adds that to help her gain more followers, she must first create divine miracles. The goddess of light responds that her current ability is not sufficient to produce large-scale miracles. Dao responds that this is exactly why he will help. In that instant, a yellow sphere forms between his fingers. The goddess of light seems to recognize it. A flame begins to take shape in the air. A manifestation from the heavens occurs. After all that, a figure emerges. A silver-haired girl appears. Dao quickly snaps his fingers again. As a result, new clothes materialize for the entity. This manifestation from the heavens is named Kang. The goddess asks why he summoned this girl. The protagonist replies that he had already said it was to help her create miracles. Dao orders that from that moment on, she will always be by the goddess's side, constantly performing miracles to gain the faith of more people. The goddess then agrees, stating that if this is the case, she will obey the protagonist. At that moment, the young man feels something different. Kang asks if something happened. Shortly after, the boy exits the bath. The goddess of light asks if he's okay. The protagonist wonders what's happening to him. The spirit explains that since Kang is his strongest heavenly manifestation, reviving her required an extreme amount of power. Due to the high energy consumption, he is likely experiencing something similar to anemia. On the verge of fainting, the protagonist asks why the spirit didn't warn him beforehand. The young man collapses, unconscious. A while later, the protagonist is lying in bed. Kang, concerned, asks about the condition of her master. She mentions that the heavenly Dao passed out even after reviving her. Kang seems very worried, wondering what she should do. Suddenly, she seems to have an idea. She mentions a rumor from the West that when someone is in a deep sleep and won't wake up, they can be revived with a kiss from their true love. So she decides to try and wake her master this way. She begins to approach the unconscious boy. However, the others start arguing over who will perform the task. Then another girl intervenes in the situation. She says that it looks like his spiritual power suddenly disappeared. So what they need to do is simply restore his spiritual power. Kin says that it sounds simple, but her master's power is vast. She questions whether it could really be replenished. The girl asks why she wouldn't be capable of doing so. She points out that they were all generated by the heavenly Dao's power. As for returning the power, it should be their decision. Yuming agrees, saying that what the girl said makes sense and is worth a try. Kin also agrees. The girls begin to remove part of their robes. The goddess of light, seeing this, asks what they're doing. Kang replies that it's obvious. They're trying to wake the heavenly Dao. They proceed in a different manner. The three attendants approach the protagonist's body. The goddess of light, in disbelief, says it's obvious they aren't saving the protagonist. However, Haga, another girl, says that if she doesn't believe it, she can join them. Because at that moment, there's always room for one more. Embarrassed, the goddess of light says she doesn't want to join in. Meanwhile, Yuming is near the boy's body. She remarks that she's indeed being inappropriate with her own master. Each of them seems to be admiring the sacred body of the man. Kin, however, does something that goes beyond all limits. The attendants are very surprised by what's happening. Various playful acts take place amidst all of this. Time passes again. The protagonist starts to wake up. Disoriented, he asks what happened and wants to know how long he was unconscious. Looking down, he realizes he's undressed and that one of his attendants is beside him. The boy, embarrassed, wonders what happened. Another girl explains that he overused his spiritual power and, as a result, fainted. For that reason, they were helping him restore his spiritual power in a special way. Therefore, he should take full responsibility for it. Shortly after, the attendants awaken. Kin mentions that the subordinate was very worried about him. Yuming says that, as expected, she knew her lord would wake up. However, Dao still wants to know what happened while he was unconscious. The spirit, apparently embarrassed, says that the system automatically locks when the host is engaged in unusual activities. For that reason, there's no need for the host to worry. Dao, still disoriented, asks what the spirit means by that. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tab's channel.